BBC One, and you're watching this BBC Referendum special from Glasgow, and the BBC is forecasting now very firmly that this is a no vote in the independence referendum. Joe, your response to it?
Well, I'm delighted that we look like we're having a no vote across Scotland. Obviously, final results still to come in. My own area of Eastern Bartonshire very strongly voted no, and I think also had the highest turnout in the country. So, from a personal perspective, that is particularly good. And I think actually the engagement that the public have displayed with this debate. I mean, seeing turnouts of in the 80% in a lot of areas of the country has actually been something which I think all sides can welcome, and actually means that we've got a really sort of good base to move forward, because everybody can say, well, look, Scotland has had its say, people really have expressed what they think, and then we can move forward and I hope try to make sure that we do that together, using the passion on both sides of the argument, because we do all want to see the best future for Scotland.
Joe, when Mr Cameron speaks later, I mean, Mr Salmond will too, but when Mr Cameron does, what does he need to say in order to convince you that change is on his way?
I think we'll be listening very carefully to what he does say, and then we'll obviously, as a team approach, the SNP government always operates as a team. We'll obviously make a decision on that thereafter. But Joe's right. The energy of this campaign, the enthusiasm of voters on both sides getting involved in politics for the first time. The number of people who have registered for the first time in my city, Dundee, where there was a good yes vote. There were 8,000 new people went onto the register for the first time ever, and that's something that, as Joe said, we should make sure that we catch and hold on to as we move Scotland forward. I
think we're quite close to a very important moment, the moment where the No campaign will reach its target, and I think it's going to do that in Fife, which is Gordon Brown's own area. I mean, it's other people's area too, but Gordon Brown has his constituency there. Let's have a look at the Declaration Hall in Fife, and they'll be getting ready soon. I think we should stay on these images now for a while, because if we get the declaration, I think it will be the declaration that takes us over the finishing line. And just, Sarah, underline for us the makeup here in Fife and why this is of interest to us, not least because it could take us into the final outcome.
Given what we've seen of the way the vote's gone tonight, we expect this will probably be a no vote. But going into this election, when we didn't know what the result was going to be, we would have said that Fife was a bit of a bellwether, actually. A lot of it's really quite prosperous, but there are high levels of deprivation in some areas, like Methil, which contrasts very strongly with prosperous South St Andrews or Glenrothes. Gordon Brown's the MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. Mingus Campbell, of course, is the MP for North East Fife, so there is a strong tradition of better together votes there, but the SNP have made gains recently there, as they have across Scotland, so there was some reason to think that they might pick up some votes in Fife, but if it goes along with the pattern of the rest of Scotland, then it's probably going to be a fairly decisive no.
I mean, I mentioned Gordon Brown to start, clearly, because I'm wondering whether his very energetic appearance towards the end of the campaign, I'm not suggesting he hadn't appeared before, of course he had, but his very energetic interventions towards the end, will they have done something to the vote in Fife because of who he is and where it is?
It may have done, although I suspect you may see a pattern in Fife that you've seen across the whole of Scotland, and it's a very big question whether it was his interventions late in the campaign, because he'd made a few speeches before, but he really threw himself into it in the last fortnight, and he was the one who came up with the promises of extra powers, got the UK party leaders together. He's the one who came up with the timetable, and he was making some very forceful arguments. Difficult to say whether he swayed the polls as a result of that and got voters to change their minds, or whether Scotland was always preparing to vote no and he tapped into some of that.
Better Together were clear that they thought he was doing good work for them, and frankly they sidelined both Alistair Darling and indeed Ed Miliband. I mean, I made a call on one of the key days, a couple of days ago, in which I said, look, I've just realised this Ed Miliband event is going to be too late to get on the 10 o'clock news, and I was told, you noticed, did you? It was quite deliberate that the UK Labour leader was not seen as a vote winner. His trust ratings were no better than David Cameron's, despite the fact he's a Labour leader. His trust ratings were just as bad as David Cameron's here in Scotland. There was a conscious decision that Alistair Darling had suffered in that debate with Alex Salmond, the second debate, and that Gordon Brown spoke to the parts of the electorate that had to be won over. parts of the electorate, of course, that still voted yes in Glasgow, in the central belt and west of Scotland as well.
Although not as yes as they might have done had he not intervened.
Indeed.
What was really interesting during this campaign, when Ed Miliband did come up to Scotland, he looked uncomfortable. He didn't look as though he was in natural Labour territory, even when he was in parts of the country that do vote Labour by large margins. Even David Cameron actually looked a little bit more comfortable with the settings he found himself in than Ed Miliband. And that's fine when you've got Gordon Brown to step in towards the end of the campaign and talk to Scottish voters. That's a problem for Labour in Scotland going into the 2015 election, going into the 2016 Holyrood election, if you have got a Labour leader who just can't speak to the Labour heartlands in Scotland.
We're staying on this image in Fife, and although it looks as if there's not much happening there, there will be something happening there quite soon. We're expecting the declaration from Fife, and we're expecting that to tip the No campaign over the line and to be able to formally declare that the No campaign has won this independence referendum in Scotland. Andrew Marr is with us still, and he's at Ingliston on the outskirts of Edinburgh. Andy, forgive me if I interrupt you if we get this interruption, if we get this declaration, but I'm just wondering, at this point, we're on the verge of the formal confirmation of the victory of the No's. Your thoughts?
And this is the moment we can all go off and get bacon sandwiches, I hope, and Hugh. No, this has been, it's very, very clear what's happening now. Scotland is voting to stay inside the Union, but in terms it's delivered a kind of Scottish shock which will change the British system. What I see at the moment over the last few 20 minutes or half an hour of interviews, however, is a very important and potentially damaging split emerging. All your Labour politicians are prepared to see federal parliaments or assemblies across England, but not an English parliament. Lots of Tory MPs want to see an English federal parliament. That's a big split, and I don't see how that's going to be resolved between the parties. Labour doesn't want an English parliament because they wouldn't dominate an English parliament under any foreseeable future. But a lot of people will say, well, if you want an English parliament, you're going to have to win England. So there's a big argument coming up between the Conservatives and the Labour Party, with the Liberal Democrats probably somewhere in the middle. And I think that's the kind of thing which could produce a very, very long delay before we get real radical change. I think Scottish Parliament will get its extra powers relatively soon, as promised by Gordon Brown and the Unionist parties, because that has to happen. But the English question is going to fester for some time to come.
Thanks very much, Andy.
For the Fife Council local government area at the Scottish independence referendum held on the 18th of September 2014, hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Fife Council area is 254,162. The turnout is 84.1%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 114,148. No, 139,788. There were 226 rejected ballots. The reasons for rejection are as follows.
So we have the result in from Fife, and just to underline what's happened, because this is a very significant result, the No campaign, a very big majority for them in Fife, 55% to 45%. And that means that we are approaching the moment where we can say exactly what's happened in this referendum. And that is it. Scotland has voted no in this referendum on independence. The result in Fife has taken the No campaign over the line, and the official result of this referendum is a no. Well, that's a very significant moment, Sarah.
It certainly is. What was made clear throughout this campaign was that the status quo was not on the ballot paper, that if you voted no, which is what the country has done, you were not voting for things to stay exactly the same. However, it was never entirely clear how they were going to change. We're going to be talking about that for the next few hours, days, weeks, months. very possibly it could drag on for years, because even though the 3 UK party leaders promised a timetable that would get all of this done in 9 months, there are huge questions raised by the scale of constitutional change that's being discussed, and it's very difficult to see how they can be sorted in such a short timescale.
Nick?
Scotland has rejected independence. It's done it by a significant margin. It was the First Minister himself, Alex Salmond, who said in advance that if this was the outcome, that would be it for a generation. His deputy, Nicola Sturgeon, said that meant at least 15 years. So on the surface, when you first look at this result, you might say, that's it. It's over. The constitutional debate is at an end. But of course, because the yes vote has done so well, because it's got well over 1 million votes, because it's in the mid-40%, it is clear that there was some form of mandate for change. It is clear, too, that this was a referendum not just on the constitutional status of Scotland, but in effect on the entire political establishment and political class, and that many people rejected the status quo. And the argument will now begin, rather than end, about exactly what needs to change in Scotland to give it some form of stability, some sort of certainty about its future governing relationships with Westminster. And as a result of that, of course, it will unlock a great debate not had before about the governing arrangements in England, about extending them in Wales and extending them in Northern Ireland too. So in one sense, Hugh, we are at a very profound moment. We are at the end of a journey for some people who've dreamt of Scottish independence, not just for weeks and months or years, but decades. At another level, we are at the beginning of a huge national conversation about how the UK changes.
The time is 11 minutes past 6 on this referendum special. If you're just joining us, we can confirm that the latest results in have taken the No campaign over the finishing line, and Scotland has rejected independence, and Scotland has voted to stay within the United Kingdom. This was the reaction in the Better Together headquarters just a few moments ago. Joe Swinson and Joe Fitzpatrick still with us. Joe Swinson, a Lib Dem, so clearly in this instance, Joe, you'll be celebrating. If you were there, you'd be celebrating with them.
Well, I'm celebrating here. I'm absolutely delighted that we've got this no vote. It's a good result for Scotland, and it's a good result also for the rest of the United Kingdom. And I'm very excited because this isn't just the end of a journey. This is the beginning of further change. And as a Liberal Democrat, I'm very excited about the prospect of a move towards more powers for the Scottish Parliament. And indeed, as Nick was saying, that constitutional question more generally across the UK about getting power out of Westminster and back in the hands of people in communities up and down the country. I think that's an agenda which is one I hadn't necessarily predicted, you know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago when this debate started, that we would be in this position, and I think it is incredibly exciting that we are.
Joe Fitzpatrick, now that we have the official verdict of the people, what do you say?
Well, obviously I'm hugely disappointed. I truly believe that independence is the best way for Scotland to forge a better future. But of course, we always said we would respect the decision of the people of Scotland, and so congratulate the No campaign on their victory tonight. And you know, but I think we see the Better Together campaign celebrating there. But I think yes, campaigners can celebrate as well, although it might be more difficult right now. They had a fantastic campaign, I think, involving lots and lots of people who've never been involved in politics before. And I hope that as we move forward, as maybe the disappointment edges away a little bit, that we can find a way to keep those people engaged in politics here in Scotland. Scottish politics has changed forever.
Do you think people have overstated their criticism of parts of the campaign, and some people even expressing a view that it'll be rather difficult to mend some of the damage of the campaign?
I think overwhelmingly the campaign has been very good-natured. There's small numbers of people on both sides who have let the country down, but these are tiny numbers of people. Overwhelmingly, this has been a great experience for democracy and something that Scotland can be very proud of.
A thought on any damage caused by and in the campaign, and whether you think that is something that can heal quickly?
Well, I mean, what struck me when campaigning was that there were these really engaged debates, and you had people, whether that was in family groups, in friendships, in workplaces, that were on very much different sides of the same debate. And I think generally that was done in a good-natured way. There were obviously exceptions to that, which I think some of which were quite worrying. But we do need to make sure we bring people together, that we have one future for Scotland that we can get behind, and use that energy and passion that we've seen in the debate to help build the best future for Scotland.
At this moment, Nick, I think it's worth telling viewers, there'll be viewers now waking up to this news, and I'm just wanting to underline not just the result, which is what's happened, but what we can now expect. Because we can now expect a statement later from Mr Salmond. But before that, I think we may... here we are, on time. This is the First Minister and his response.
Can I say thank you for that reception, but above all, thank you to Scotland for 1.6 million votes for Scottish independence. Now, our friends in the Highlands of Scotland are still to speak, so the final results aren't in. But we know that there is going to be a majority for the No campaign. And it's important to say that our referendum was an agreed and consented process, and Scotland has, by majority, decided not, at this stage, to become an independent country. I accept that verdict of the people, and I call on all of Scotland to follow suit in accepting the democratic verdict of the people of Scotland. But I think all of us in this campaign will say that 55%, that 1.6 million votes, is a substantial vote for Scottish independence and the future of this country. Let us say something which I hope unites all campaigns and all Scots. I think the process by which we have made our decision as a nation reflects enormous credit upon Scotland. A turnout of 86% is one of the highest in the democratic world for any election or any referendum in history. This has been a triumph for the democratic process and for participation in politics. For example, the initiative by which our 16 and 17-year-olds were able to vote has proved to be a resounding success. I suspect that no one will ever again dispute their right and ability to participate fully and responsibly in democratic elections. So we now face the consequences of Scotland's decision. Firstly, Clause 30 of the Edinburgh Agreement is now in operation. On behalf of the Scottish Government, I accept the result, and I pledge to work constructively in the interests of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Secondly, the Unionist parties made vows late in the campaign to devolve more powers to Scotland. Scotland will expect these to be honoured in rapid course. Just as a reminder, we have been promised a second reading of a Scotland bill by the 27th of March next year. And not just the 1.6 million Scots who voted for independence will demand that that timetable is followed, but all Scots who participated in this referendum will demand that that timetable is followed. I'll be speaking to the Prime Minister shortly after this statement, and I'll have a press conference later today to reflect on that and the full results. But can I return, thirdly, to the empowerment of so many Scots entering the political process for the very first time? It's something that is so valuable, it has to be cherished, preserved and built upon. I've said it a number of times in this campaign that the most moving thing I saw was the queue of people in Dundee 2 or 3 weeks ago, patiently waiting to register to vote, the most of them for the first time ever, deciding to participate in the democratic process. Today in Inverurie, I met a 61-year-old lady just coming out of the polling station who had never voted before in her life. I met a soldier, a former soldier, who hadn't voted since he'd left the army some 24 years ago. And these people were inspired to enter democratic politics by the thought that they could make a difference in building something better for their country. These are people who all of us, as we campaigned, have met and been inspired by. And all of us are a part of all of that experience that we have encountered. Whatever else we can say about this referendum campaign, we have touched sections of the community who've never before been touched by politics. These sections of the community have touched us and touched the political process. I don't think that will ever be allowed to go back to business as usual in politics again. So friends, sometimes it's best to reflect where we are in a journey. 45%, 1.6 million of our fellow citizens voting for independence. I don't think that any of us, whenever we entered politics, would have thought such a thing to be either credible or possible. I think over the last few weeks, we have seen a scare and a fear of enormous proportions, not the scaremongering directed at the Scottish people, but the scare and the fear at the heart of the Westminster establishment as they realised the mass movement of people that was going forward in Scotland. And therefore, today of all days, as we bring Scotland together, let us not dwell on the distance we have fallen short. Let us dwell on the distance we have travelled and have confidence that the movement is abroad in Scotland that will take this nation forward, and we shall go forward as one nation. Thank you very much.
First Minister Alex Salmond appearing at 6:20 in the morning in Edinburgh and addressing his supporters, the Yes campaign, and telling them not to dwell on the difference, the way in which they fell short of the target, but to dwell on the journey. And it has been a remarkable journey. When you think that a quarter of a century ago, the SNP was considered by many to be some kind of fringe movement. Well, here we are in 2014 with a referendum on independence in Scotland and 45% of the voters on an enormous turnout voting for independence. They didn't win. That is true. The No campaign has scored a handsome win, as we can demonstrate here at Pacific Quay in Glasgow. The No campaign has scored 55%, which corresponds to 1.9 million votes. But more than 1.5 million people in Scotland actively voted to reject the Union, and that is something, of course, that has to be picked up now by other pro-Union parties who have been making big promises and ambitious pledges in the past few weeks. David Cameron is one of them, and the Prime Minister will be appearing in Downing Street within the hour. We think it'll be shortly after 7 o'clock, possibly between 7 and 7:15, to talk about his response and how he plans to deliver the pledge that was waived by the parties at Westminster during the last stages of this referendum campaign. James Landale, our Deputy Political Editor, is in Downing Street for us this morning. And James, could you give us a sense of the Prime Minister's response?
Yes, what we know now is that the Prime Minister, after 7 o'clock this morning, will make what his advisers are saying is a significant statement. He will speak, we are told, of the need for the UK now to come together. He will also speak not just of his plans for further devolution in Scotland, but we are also told he will give a very clear direction of his plans for how he thinks the constitution, the devolution settlement, should also be changed, not just in Northern Ireland and Wales, but also specifically in England. They are pointing us very clearly in that direction, that he will not give chapter and verse, but a very clear direction, not only that this issue needs to be addressed, but his ideas of what they should be. We're also told that he will give a sense that actually, in his view, it has been a clear result, and to a certain extent a vindication of his decision to actually decide to hold this referendum and agree the format. His advisers say, look, there have been lots of talk and discussion in recent days about, was it the right question to be asked in the referendum? Was it right to allow voters aged 16 and 17 to vote in this? Was it right not to have the issue of further devolution as a third option, if you like, on the referendum? We are told that in the Prime Minister's view, all those questions have now been answered by the clear result that will take place. Now, he spoke to Alistair Darling a short while ago to congratulate him on the campaign. We also know that he's going to be speaking to the First Minister, Alex Salmond, later. We're also told that the Prime Minister has been up most of the night watching the results. He hasn't just sort of got up and had a feel. He's been watching them come in throughout the night. So, as we say, a statement here shortly, not too far away. The Prime Minister himself tweeted not a short while ago saying that he would do that. So the Prime Minister being very helpful. He not only gives us statements, he also gives operational notes about when he's going to do his press conferences these days.
OK, James, thank you very much. James Landale there in Downing Street with a taste of what is to come later this morning. Within about probably 45 minutes, the Prime Minister will give us his response to the result of the Scottish referendum. There'll be a weather report for you because lots of you now joining us for the first time this morning. It's 28 minutes past 6. You're watching special coverage of the results of the Scottish independence referendum. There'll be a full weather report for you shortly, so don't fear, we'll have that for you. And in the meantime, before we pick up with the Scottish Secretary who'll be joining us, it's time for the news where you are. Time is 6:32, and if you're just joining us, a very good morning and welcome. We're here at the headquarters of BBC Scotland in Glasgow, and this is a special programme covering the results of the Scottish referendum, which took place yesterday. The results have been coming in overnight, and within the past hour, we were able to confirm that the No campaign has won. The people of Scotland have rejected independence and they voted to stay in the Union. We'll be talking to more special guests in just a few minutes' time, but now it's time for a summary of the news with Charlie State.
Thank you, Hugh. Good morning. Voters in Scotland have rejected independence by a margin of 55% to 45%, with all but one result in. In the last few minutes, Scotland's First Minister Alex Salmond has said he accepts his defeat, but he called on the main British parties to make good on their promises on greater powers being devolved to the Scottish Assembly.
On behalf of the Scottish Government, I accept the result and I pledge to work constructively in the interests of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. Secondly, the Unionist parties made vows late in the campaign to devolve more powers to Scotland. Scotland will expect these to be honoured in rapid course.
It has been a disappointing night for the Yes campaign, which has been ahead in only 4 areas. David Cameron has congratulated the leader of Better Together, Alistair Darling, on a well-fought campaign. Our political correspondent Ian Watson has been following the night's events.
That's a word they're not used to saying. This is the official No campaign, Better Together, celebrating Scotland saying no to independence. Their mood was in stark contrast to his, the leader of the Yes campaign, Alex Salmond, about to concede defeat as he left Aberdeenshire.
The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 16,350. No, 19,036.
Clackmannanshire in central Scotland was the first council area to declare, with the majority of voters saying no. That sounded the alarm for the Yes campaign. It was clear that the momentum was with their opponents.
To the referendum question.
But there was some better news for the Yes campaign in Scotland's largest city.
Yes. 194,000. No. 169,347.
Glasgow wasn't the only city to say yes. Scotland's 4th largest, Dundee, also backed independence, but the SNP's deputy leader conceded that was unlikely to be enough.
With over 1 million people voting at this stage for independence, many of those who will have voted no to independence because they believe that that would deliver substantial more powers for the Scottish Parliament, there's a big appetite for substantial change.
Things will change in Scotland, that the Scottish Parliament will have enhanced powers.
Turnout has been high, from 75% in Glasgow to more than 90% in Stirling, and the high spirits here at the No campaign anticipate the likely final result, that Scotland will have voted to stay in the UK. Ian Watson, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, the Prime Minister David Cameron is due to make a statement within the next half an hour. He's expected to set out proposals to devolve more powers to the Scottish Parliament. Those are this morning's main news stories. Now back to Scotland Decides.
Charlie, thank you very much. Well, this is what we're going to do in the next few minutes. In a moment, I'll ask Jeremy Vine to just go through the story of the night so that all of you joining us this morning at breakfast time can catch up with some of these individual results, because there were some very dramatic results during the course of the evening. I've been joined by Dr. John Reid. John, thanks for coming in. Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
We'll be with John, and Joe is still with us too, and we'll catch up with their views in a second, and we'll also be talking to the Scottish Secretary, Mr Carmichael, who's with Andy Marr. So all of that coming up, lots of reaction for you. We'll be taking in the full magnitude of this result. It is a very big political milestone in the history of the United Kingdom. But first, Jeremy will tell us about what happened. Hi, Jeremy.
Hugh, well, it's been a long night. If you're just joining us, let's remind you, 32 council areas were voted in. We have all but one of the results. And what I'm going to do is pull them off the wall over there and put them on the balcony. We'll see the votes as they came in. So between 1 and 2 in the morning, we just had 2. Clackmannanshire and Orkney. Just a few votes going on the balcony below me there. Then between 2 and 3, Shetland and Eleanor Shear, Western Isles, the islands came in. Again, not very many votes at all. Between 3 and 4 in the morning, we had Inverclyde and Dundee and others, and Dundee was the first yes. And then between 4 and 4:30 a.m., Falkirk and Stirling were among those coming in. But we were always waiting for the really big councils, and just after 4:30, Glasgow came in, and this is what happened. So all of these votes now going on the balcony as Glasgow's votes are brought into the equation. Now you can see what's happening. The no campaign well in the lead here. The yes looking for some luck from somewhere, and it never really came. Between 5 and 6, we had South Ayrshire and East Ayrshire coming in. And at that point, the BBC was able to forecast that this would be a no vote. And then at 6:10, the winning line was crossed with another big council coming in, Fife. So there you see the votes on the balcony going past the winning line and the result of this extraordinary referendum that Scotland has voted no. Hugh.
Jeremy, thank you very much. And there it is, in massive capital letters on our massive screen. So it's unmissable. That is the verdict. That is the people's verdict. We talked back at 10:30 last night as we came on air about waiting for the people's verdict, and it's a very clear verdict indeed, by 55% to 45% roughly. That is what's happened. They've rejected independence after a highly charged campaign, and we maybe will pick up on some of the points about the nature of the campaign and indeed what the Prime Minister's response is likely to be, indeed what it needs to be in order to satisfy so many people in Scotland who've clearly demonstrated an appetite for change. The Scottish Secretary is with my colleague Andrew Marr at Ingleston. Let's join them.
Well, Hugh, I started these long, dark hours with Alistair Carmichael, the Scottish Secretary, and so we end them. Alistair, you now know what the result is, and you've heard something of Alex Salmond's rather gracious acceptance speech, but in it there was a steely core. He said all Scots, not just the 1.5 million who voted against the Union, will now expect very prompt new powers, as promised, to be delivered.
Indeed, and the message for Alex Salmond is that he can be part of the process of delivering this. Remember what we set out with this referendum. We wanted a decision which would be fair, legal and decisive. We have achieved all three, I think. I think the people of Scotland will want to hear tonight that it is accepted by nationalists that this is the decisive verdict and we're not going to keep coming back to this, and that he, in fact, should be part of the process of defining what these extra powers should be. You know, he had great fun in your programme not that long ago that I should be on Team Scotland. Well, it's clear now that the team that speaks for Scotland is the team that wants Scotland to remain part of the United Kingdom.
So your message to him is come in.
He should come into that team now and work along with the rest of us. He's got a contribution to make.
And in specific terms, we will see the detail of a Scotland bill by early next year, by January or so.
We will be publishing the draft clauses according to the timetable that has already been laid out by the beginning of next year. It's going to be a demanding timetable. You know, it's going to require a lot of hard work, a lot of goodwill from a wide range of people, not just the political parties. We need to hear business, we need to hear trade unions, churches, local authorities. That's the way we build consensus in this country.
Mr. Carmichael, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and back to Hugh in the studio.
Andrew, thanks very much. Go straight to Edinburgh. Alistair Darling.
We have chosen unity over division and positive change rather than needless separation. Well done. Today is a momentous result for Scotland and also for the United Kingdom as a whole. By confirming our place within the Union, we have reaffirmed all that we have in common and the bonds that tie us together. Let them never be broken. But as we celebrate, let us also listen. more than 85% of the Scottish population has voted. People who were disengaged from politics have turned out in large numbers. And while they have voted for the Constitution, that was not the only or perhaps the major issue that drove them to the polls. Every political party must now listen to their cry for change, which could be echoed in every part of our United Kingdom, but had the opportunity to express itself first in Scotland. To those who have supported us and all that great team of volunteers, that's you. All of you, all the political parties who worked for this outcome, I want to say thanks from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much. You represent the majority of opinion and your voices have been heard. We've taken on the argument and we've won. The silent have spoken. Of course, I understand that amongst those who supported yes, there will be disappointment or even grief. Defeat is painful, and I can tell you that from my own personal experience. I know there are many people with deep and genuine commitments to Scotland on the yes side. They will and must continue to make their contribution to the political debate in our country. But that debate must move on from the Constitution to the day and daily issues that affect their lives and prospects. And the Scottish Parliament must use both the powers that it holds now and those which are coming to it to address these concerns. When the Scottish Parliament was born, delivered by Donald Dewar and the government of which I was a member, we talked about devolution being a journey. He would have been proud that the Scottish democracy is so vibrant, so alive and so determined to take the next step down the road that we began. So I'm clear that all of the parties who've made shared commitments to change must now start to translate those commitments into action, and I give you my commitment to support that process. We will work with all of the people of Scotland in advancing these commitments. And we must also recognise that the debate has created some fairly deep divisions in our country. And this has been a campaign that has both energised but at times divided. And some people have felt unable to speak except through the ballot box. Those divisions now need to be addressed, and that requires leadership. And my colleagues and I will play our part in bringing our country together to demonstrate that after this vote we can remain united. This has not been an easy campaign. Campaigning against yes for change is sometimes difficult than to argue for no. We were obliged to point out that some of the arguments for separation were going to cause damage to our country, but we had to do that because those risks were real, and it's my view it contributes to a good sense of the Scottish people that they decided that these risks were too great to take. But the vote is over, and the Scottish people have now given their verdict. We have made a decision for progress and change for Scotland and within the United Kingdom. Come on, Scotland, let's get on with it together.
Headquarters in Glasgow, that is Alistair Darling, who chaired that campaign and of course featured in the debates with Alex Salmond during what was at times a very highly charged campaign. But speaking there and laying down the law, really, saying, well, yes, change has to come, but pointing out that the Scottish Parliament, in his view, already has powers that maybe it's not using as fully as it might. So there was a mixed message there. And, of course, we are still looking forward to the statement by the Prime Minister, Mr Cameron, in Downing Street within the next half hour. Watching that with me, we have Lord Reid, John Reid, who spoke to us, several hours ago, John, now. And we have Joan McAlpine of the SNP. So thank you both for joining us. John, first of all, Mr Darling's message there, acknowledging it's not been an easy campaign, but saying essentially people had not responded to fear, they'd responded to a positive message. I'm sure Joan will have a view on that, but let's have your view first.
Well, first of all, it's been a robust campaign, and it's been a very, very long campaign. Not just the 2 years of this campaign, but we've been discussing this whole thing in Scotland for at least 40 years during my time. The people have now spoken. The votes have been counted. Their will is clear. It is decisive. The settled will of the Scottish people is that we should continue to play a part, along with the other nations, in the United Kingdom. And I think that's the first thing that is absolutely clear now. Don't let's have any more, well, we might have another referendum next week or next year. The second thing is that there are a significant number of people who want a greater degree of autonomy in our affairs. And, because I don't believe the yes vote was all about that, there are a lot of people who are alienated from politics in general, probably not just in Scotland, but throughout the United Kingdom. We have to address both of those. And the third thing is reconciliation. We should have respect for each other. I do for Alex Salmond. I thought his speech tonight was gracious. And Nicola Sturgeon. We are Scots men and women. We should work together to help the reconstruction of not only our own country, but the United Kingdom, because the whole idea of the sense of Britishness needs to be modernised, the Constitution, and there are many other issues where we can work together. And I hope that the Scottish National Party, under Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, will involve themselves in the discussions that will now start about how we make the Scottish Parliament not only more powerful, but more responsible by raising its own taxation. And in a wider sphere, all of the parties who have been involved in this campaign take part in addressing the needs of the rest of the nations of the United Kingdom. Because this vote was about whether we are members of the club, but once you decide you're members of the club, changing the rules involves all the members of the club.
Joan, what is your sense of what needs to happen now?
Well, I think the first thing I would want to say is that we do accept this verdict, and we do accept it with good grace. And that was what the Edinburgh Agreement was all about. We would accept the verdict of the Scottish people. I think that we have to also accept that 1.6 million of the Scottish people voted for independence for Scotland. They voted, the question was quite clear. The people who voted yes knew what they were voting for, and I don't quite agree with John when he suggests that it was, you didn't use the protest vote there, John, but I heard you earlier on the radio when I was driving up from Dumfries, and you suggested that some of the yes vote might be a protest vote. It's certainly a protest against the bedroom tax and the inequality of the UK and the waste of money on Trident nuclear weapons. But there was, people knew what they were voting for, and they had been thrown a lot of very scary stories, particularly in the weeks before the vote. So they went into the polling booths and they voted for independence in very large numbers. Now, we're now, as John talked about, entering a process of reconciliation. And I think the views of those 1.6 million Scots have to be taken on board.
OK. Important thoughts. Stay with us, please, because we'll have the Prime Minister speaking very shortly. At this moment, I'd like to say thanks to all our viewers on BBC World, our global audience who have been watching our coverage because they're leaving us. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you on the next referendum special, whenever that is. In the meantime, we are, of course, going to welcome more viewers joining us around the United Kingdom who, at this time of the morning, would be familiar with lots of regular features on breakfast television, including, of course, the all-important weather. And my good friend Carol Kirkwood, I think Carol's a good Inverness girl, is at Holyrood with the latest weather for us. Hi, Carol.
Hi Hugh, thank you very much. You're quite right, I'm in Edinburgh, and this morning, well, as you can see behind me, it's a fairly dreich start to the day. It's cloudy, it's drizzly, and it's also rather misty. And in fact, if you're heading out anywhere across the UK today, it's probably worthwhile packing your brolly because the forecast is one of scattered showers. Now, overnight, we've seen some heavy thundery downpours across parts of England and also Wales. Not all of us are going to catch them by any means, but they are going to rumble on as we go through the course of the day. So, starting the forecast at 9 o'clock in Scotland, the brightest conditions today will be in the west and also around the Moray Firth. For the rest of Scotland, it's quite a cloudy picture with the drizzle coming in from the North Sea. Northwest England also seeing some sunshine, northeast England having the low cloud and the fret. Then as we come south towards the Midlands, East Anglia heading down towards the south coast, this is where we're prone to catch further thundery downpours. They're hit and miss, but if you catch one, as I mentioned, you will know all about it. And we're not immune to them either across the southwest, especially so as we go through the latter part of the day. Now into Wales here too, we've also got the risk of some thundery downpours as we've already seen, but in between there'll be some bright spells or some sunshine. And for Northern Ireland, well, it's a murky start to the day, and again a fair bit of cloud around with just 1 or 2 showers. Now, through the course of the day, the risk of the thunderstorms continues anywhere from Wales to the Midlands, East Anglia, southwards. In between, there will be some sunshine, and we hang on to all this cloud coming in from the North Sea. So under the cloud, the temperatures will be lower, but further south, we're looking at temperatures in any sunshine that bit higher, but not as high as yesterday. Then as we head on through the evening and overnight, we hang on to those thunderstorms across parts of England and Wales, again fairly hit and miss. So it's going to be muggy here, whereas for Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, under clearer skies, it's going to be chilly. In fact, in rural areas, single figures are really what we're looking at, so quite a contrast. Then as we go through Saturday, we start off in a dry and bright note for Scotland and Northern Ireland, much brighter than it has been, particularly so in the east. We also start with some thundery showers across parts of England and Wales, but it will improve from the north through the course of the day as the wind changes direction. And then for Sunday, well, we again start on a chilly note, but once again we'll have some bright skies. However, we'll also see more cloud come in during the course of the day from the east, and temperatures again a little bit lower. So in summary, for the weekend, the showers will ease, the cloud will break at times, and there will also be some sunshine.
Carol, thank you very much. Carol Kirkwood there with the weather and at Holyrood. And more from Carol a little later on. We are here at BBC Scotland in Glasgow, and we have the result of this referendum on Scottish independence. There we are, the headquarters of BBC Scotland, projecting the figures for you. We still have one result to go, but it will not make any difference to the verdict, which is that the people of Scotland have voted against independence, 1.9 million to 1.5 million voting in favour of independence. That is the verdict, and we are expecting the Prime Minister, David Cameron, to add his thoughts in Downing Street in a short while. I can see that they're making preparations in Downing Street now. They are sorting out the lectern and testing the sound there. So Mr Cameron will be appearing in Downing Street in a short while. I expect that to happen within about 10 to 15 minutes. In the meantime, not too far away, if we pass through Parliament Square, we have Andrew Neil for us on College Green. And Andrew, tell us what's going on there.
Thanks, Hugh. We're here in College Green. We've moved from our studio. It's a beautiful morning here in London. It's very mild, not so much as much mist as there is in Edinburgh. I'm joined by Kate Williams and by Vernon Bogner. We're going to talk about the constitutional implications. The Westminster party leaders had a panic attack. They threw in a lot more devolution at the last minute. They've now got to deliver on that, but there's plenty of people in that building over there saying that's fine for Scotland, but we want to know what it means for England as well, and you can't do one without the other. Is this any way to change a constitution?
No, it isn't. And of course, these promises were made after some people had already voted by post. But as you imply, Andrew, these promises were made without consulting Parliament. in which, of course, the majority of MPs represent English constituencies. They're going to be very unhappy about this, and they'll demand that the English question is looked at again. In fact, this referendum has probably awakened the slumbering beast of English nationalism.
Really, that's serious?
I believe so.
And Alex Salmond was saying that he was reminding that Gordon Brown, on behalf of the party leaders, had made a promise there would have to be a second reading of a new sort of home rule bill for Scotland by March. Well, you can't do that, I would suggest, and answer the English devolution question too.
Yes, you're right, Anu. I mean, that's an incredibly fast timetable. How on earth is that going to be possible? And then this whole question of English devolution. We were seeing Andrew Marr talking earlier about how actually to have a whole federal solution to what we have in the British government at the moment would take years to set in place. The idea of this British chamber that would just look after immigration and foreign policy. And then already people like Menzies Campbell were saying, I'd also like that to look after pensions, and so where are benefits? Are they in or are they out? So what the big question is for me is how you distinguish an issue that is purely Welsh or purely English, because so many have knock-on effects to each other. I think it's going to be very difficult, but certainly the backbenchers in there, they already aren't happy. We've seen a lot already saying they don't feel represented. They don't feel as if Cameron's listening to them. They certainly are really going to be saying that this morning. So when Parliament comes back, he's got a lot of tough questions to answer.
Can the Prime Minister get away with saying, right, we'll proceed with Scotland, we'll live our promise there, and we'll get to England, we'll come to England later?
I think he'll have to do that because no one's quite clear how the English question should be answered. And it's worth saying that even if we'd never had this independence debate, Scotland should have taxing powers. It's a bit crazy to have set up a Scottish Parliament with such minimal powers to raise its own money, when after all your local council can raise a council tax. Here's a body representing the people of Scotland without the power to raise its money. So it's a pocket money Parliament, getting its money from Westminster, so when anything goes wrong they can always blame Westminster. We're talking not just about powers for the Scottish Parliament, but fiscal responsibility, which must be a good thing.
But the sleeping giant of English nationalism that Vernon's talking about is now saying that's fine if Scotland wants to have its own tax-raising powers. We understand that. We're even in favour of it. But we want an English demos now. We want England to have its tax-raising powers too.
Yes, and people are not just saying that, but they're also saying they want equality. They want the end of the Barnett formula. They want the spending formula that initially was put in as a temporary formula, and now really people in England see as a subsidy on Scotland. So really these kind of last-minute things that were pulled out of the bag by particularly Gordon Brown, perhaps they swung the vote, we really will never know. But certainly they caused massive ructions here in Westminster, and one big victor from this, of course, is going to be UKIP. We're going to be looking at the Clacton by-election coming up, and that could be won by UKIP. And certainly they are already crowing, I think, and gloating and saying this shows that devolution is ours and people don't feel represented.
There's going to be a race or a competition for who speaks for England now.
That's absolutely right, but I agree with Kate. The party that's most likely to speak for England is UKIP, which is the nearest we've got to an English nationalist party and supports an English Parliament, which of course is one answer to the English question.
Could you imagine any other democracy in the world making such fundamental changes to its constitution in this piecemeal and panicky way?
No, that's fair enough, but nevertheless, you have to admit that this is much to the credit of democracy. We've done it in a very fair way. The Catalonians are asking for the same. We've had a fair democratic referendum, and despite allegations of intimidation, it's aroused a lot of civic spirit, particularly amongst the young.
Okay.
So perhaps we should forgive the party leaders for panicking last week.
You're too generous. But you're an academic. You're our journalist. With the sound of Big Ben behind me, let's go back to Hugh in Glasgow.
Andrew, thank you very much. And yes, it is. It's 7 in the morning. And if you're waking up and joining us here on BBC, this is our coverage of the Scottish referendum. And the votes have been counted. All the results are in, bar one. But the verdict is clear. 55% to 45%. People of Scotland have rejected independence and they've decided to stay within the United Kingdom. But what kind of United Kingdom? What kind of reshaped, reformed, reconstituted United Kingdom will that be? The Prime Minister may well provide a few clues in a few seconds. And Sarah and Nick are still with me, and John Reid and Joan McAlpine too. A quick word from each of you. Nick first, on what we're expecting here.
The people have spoken. They have rejected Scottish independence. So you might think that was that. So why not? Why are we going to hear much more from the Prime Minister? 3 reasons. more than 1.5 million British citizens voted to break away from the United Kingdom. The biggest city in Scotland voted by a majority to leave the United Kingdom. And the Westminster establishment briefly believed in the last few days that Scotland would actually break away. And so now the Prime Minister, along with all political leaders in Westminster, is convinced that he has to offer change, not just to Scotland, as was promised in this referendum campaign, but to the people of Northern Ireland, Wales, but particularly England. That is what this statement is about, saying, yes, independence is over, yes, the Scots will get more powers in their parliament, but crucially, and new, will be a promise to deal with the English question. Not to create a parliament, not even to say we'll create regional assemblies or new powers for the cities, though that may come, but to say in the short term, in the immediate period after this referendum, that English MPs must not be allowed to be outvoted by Scottish and Welsh MPs on issues that affect England alone. It's controversial, it'll be difficult, it doesn't in fact require a new law. I believe that David Cameron has the support of Nick Clegg to do this, but he doesn't have agreement across parties with Ed Miliband. That's the crucial thing we're about to hear.
Sarah?
So we have the astonishing situation where we have a very decisive vote, 55% voting to stay with the Union, a substantial number of people voting for change. The Prime Minister was among the party leaders who signed a pledge saying more powers are coming to Scotland. What powers those are exactly have not yet been agreed. What the settlement, therefore, is in England and the rest of the UK to complement that has not been agreed. So we have a decisive 55% vote for we don't know what. Because we were told it wasn't the status quo you were voting for if you voted no, but we have not seen an outline of the plans for Scotland, for England or the rest of the United Kingdom, so we don't actually know what Scotland voted for.
John, what are we waiting for?
Yes, we do know what Scotland voted for. It voted clearly to stay within the United Kingdom. What has now got to be discussed is the rules and the membership of the United Kingdom itself, now that we've said we want to be in it. And that, of course, will have to meet the pledges that were made and the demand for further power for the Scottish Parliament, because that makes it more responsible as well as more accountable. But of course also it has to address the needs of the other nations of the United Kingdom, including England, and that is now on the table because we have decided whether Scotland wants to be in the club or not, and the will of the Scottish people is clear. We want to be in it, but also we want to have greater power over our taxation, our resources, our welfare, and borrowing powers. The English want to address, as Nick said, over the question of, well, it's unfair if all the other free nations can decide on exclusively Scottish, Welsh or Northern Irish affairs, but the English can't decide on theirs. So it's a natural development of what devolution always was meant to be, which was the modernisation of the most centralised state in the world for the 21st century.
Just thinking about the cross-party attempt at a consensus here, Nick, how was the Prime Minister going to try and get around that in this statement?
I think on the issue of Scotland, the unionist parties have already been talking. Yes, they haven't agreed a package, but they have agreed a timetable. Yes, they haven't agreed a package, but they've identified certain areas of overlap. The Tories, interestingly, are the most radical on giving income tax entirely to the Scottish Parliament. It's Labour that are resisting that. On welfare, the Tories, I think, go a little further than Labour too. But I think we'll now see the creation of some form of committee. And the crucial question for today, which can't be answered now, but will be answered by Alex Salmond when he talks again later in the day, is whether the SNP will join that committee in order to draw up the proposals, or whether they will sit to one side and say, you tell us what the offer is, and then we'll give you our verdict on that offer, and we may well reject it as not good enough.
In parliamentary terms, John, how simple is it to set up something which would be credible?
In terms of Scotland, yes, or in terms of wider?
Just the committee.
Well, the fact is that we don't start with 3 blank sheets. We start with all of the 3 main parties already having discussed not only the results of the Calman Commission, which enhanced the devolution already, but also even further powers. So there are substantial areas there. Broadly, they agree. Income tax, welfare, and other taxation and borrowing. As regards the detail, of course, they disagree at present. Some Labour parties saying 15%, the Conservatives saying 40% of taxation should be devolved. But it should be possible to reach a compromise in this. And I do hope that Alex Salmond and the SNP administration will join those talks, because now that we've got the big question out the way, the Scottish people want to be in the United Kingdom.
The door's opening, John.
We can now. I'm just doing my warm-up act for the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister gives his response to the referendum.
Good morning. The people of Scotland have spoken, and it is a clear result. They have kept our country of 4 nations together. And like millions of other people, I am delighted. As I said during the campaign, it would have broken my heart to see our United Kingdom come to an end. And I know that that sentiment was shared by people not just across our country, but also around the world, because of what we've achieved together in the past and what we can do together in the future. So now it is time for our United Kingdom to come together and to move forward. A vital part of that will be a balanced settlement, fair to people in Scotland and, importantly, to everyone in England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. Let us remember first why we had this debate and why it was right to do so. The Scottish National Party was elected in Scotland in 2011 and promised a referendum on independence. We could have tried to block that. We could have tried to put it off. But just as with other big issues, it is right to take and not to duck the big decision. I am a passionate believer in our United Kingdom, and I wanted more than anything for our United Kingdom to stay together. But I'm also a Democrat, and it was right that we respected the SNP's majority in Holyrood and gave the Scottish people their right to have their say. Let us also remember why it was right to ask the definitive question, yes or no. Because now the debate has been settled for a generation, or as Alex Salmond has said, perhaps for a lifetime. So there can be no disputes, no reruns. We have heard the settled will of the Scottish people. Scotland voted for a stronger Scottish Parliament backed by the strength and security of the United Kingdom. And I want to congratulate the No campaign for that, for showing people that our nations really are better together. I also want to pay tribute to Yes Scotland for a well-fought campaign, and to say to all those who did vote for independence, we hear you. We now have a chance, a great opportunity, to change the way the British people are governed and change it for the better. Political leaders on all sides of the debate now bear a heavy responsibility to come together and work constructively to advance the interests of people in Scotland as well as those in England, Wales and Northern Ireland for each and every citizen of our United Kingdom. To those in Scotland sceptical of the constitutional promises that were made, let me say this. We have delivered on devolution under this government, and we will do so again in the next Parliament. The 3 pro-union parties have made commitments, clear commitments, on further powers for the Scottish Parliament. We will ensure that those commitments are honoured in full. And I can announce today that Lord Smith of Kelvin, who so successfully led Glasgow's Commonwealth Games, has agreed to oversee the process to take forward these devolution commitments, with powers over tax, spending and welfare, all agreed by November, and draft legislation published by January. Just as the people of Scotland will have more power over their affairs, so it follows that the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland must have a bigger say over theirs. The rights of these voters need to be respected, preserved and enhanced. It is absolutely right that a new and fair settlement for Scotland should be accompanied by a new and fair settlement that applies to all parts of our United Kingdom. In Wales, there are proposals to give the Welsh Government and Assembly more powers. And I want Wales to be at the heart of the debate on how to make our United Kingdom work for all our nations. In Northern Ireland, we must work to ensure that the devolved institutions function effectively. But I have long believed that a crucial part missing from this national discussion is England. We have heard the voice of Scotland, and now the millions of voices of England must also be heard. The question of English votes for English laws, the so-called West Lothian question, requires a decisive answer. So just as Scotland will vote separately in the Scottish Parliament on their issues of tax, spending and welfare, so too England, as well as Wales and Northern Ireland, should be able to vote on these issues. And all this must take place in tandem with and at the same pace as the settlement for Scotland. I hope that this is going to take place on a cross-party basis. I've asked William Hague to draw up these plans. We will set up a cabinet committee right away, and proposals will also be ready to the same timetable. I hope the Labour Party and other parties will contribute. It is also important that we have wider civic engagement about how to improve governance throughout our United Kingdom, including how to empower our great cities, and we will say more about this in the coming days. This referendum has been hard fought. It has stirred strong passions. It has electrified politics in Scotland and caught the imagination of people across the whole of our United Kingdom. It will be remembered as a powerful demonstration of the strength and vitality of our ancient democracy. Record numbers registered to vote and record numbers cast their vote. We should all be proud of that. It has reminded us how fortunate we are that we're able to settle these vital issues at the ballot box peacefully and calmly. Now we must look forward and turn this into the moment when everyone, whichever way they voted, comes together to build that better, brighter future for our entire United Kingdom. Thank you very much and good morning.
So we have the Prime Minister's response to the vote overnight in Scotland. David Cameron setting out his proposed timetable and his appointment of Robert Smith, Lord Smith of Kelvin, chairman of the successful organising committee for the 2014 Commonwealth Games, to oversee this process and to bring these proposals, whatever they are in their final form, together. Nick Robinson, what did you make of that?
What was striking was the promise that he would deliver, the promises in the campaign for Scotland, that there is an individual now to see that through and to stick to the timetable. But what is really new is not what he's saying about Scotland. What is new is what he's saying about England, specifically a promise to bringing English votes for English laws, a Tory manifesto promise that he didn't deliver on, there was no coalition agreement to, which in simple terms means this, that within Westminster, when there are matters being discussed which the Welsh Assembly has responsibility for, or the Scottish Parliament or the Northern Ireland Assembly, that those MPs for those countries should not be allowed to vote in Westminster. Now, lots of people watching this programme, particularly if they're English, will say, well, that makes common sense. A recent poll showed that it was popular by a margin of 5-1. Why isn't it so easy, though? Why isn't it the case that they haven't done it up till now? Simple. If you had a Labour Party in government in Westminster, magically overnight, they'd have a majority one day and no majority the next on certain issues. In other words, you would have two classes of MPs. You could have real uncertainty as to whether the government could get its own business through, let alone raising questions as to whether a Scot or a Welshman, let alone somebody from Northern Ireland, can serve in many of the key offices of state in Whitehall. Now, proposals have been brought up in the past. There was a commission done by a man called Lord Mackay on this, in order to come up with solutions which involve complex voting arrangements in the House of Commons, don't involve new laws, to try and get round that. My understanding is that Nick Clegg believes there is a working basis for an agreement. Labour are very suspicious that this might be a trap into which the Tories want to drop them.
OK, let's just stop there for a moment, because I do want to... I'll ask Sarah and I'll ask my two guests for their responses to that and to the Prime Minister's statement. Andrew Marr is still in Ingleston. And Andrew, it's been a very long night. Just wondering what your concluding thoughts are after the verdict and after what we've heard there from Mr Salmond and from Mr Cameron.
Well, what started as a vote on whether Scotland would leave the UK has ended with an extraordinary constitutional revolution announced outside Downing Street by the Prime Minister. It either means the very, very complicated arrangements that Nick suggests, or it means an English Parliament, which throws down the gauntlet to the Labour Party. But we are going to see very big change coming, and it had better come quickly. We always used to be told that if you laid all the economists in the world end to end, they still wouldn't reach a conclusion. And I think the same could be said often about parliamentary committees and inquiries and commissions. Well, it can't happen this time because it's not taking place in a kind of sealed room with the Westminster parties, the old smug consensus, getting round and arguing with each other as before. This is really taking place in a huge glass house, being watched by all the Scottish voters and by millions of people around the UK. What the Scottish shock has done is produced a constitutional revolution on a very, very tight timetable, possibly the most exciting political story in my or Nick's lifetime.
Andy, thank you so much. Andrew Marr there for us at Ingleston on the outskirts of Edinburgh. That was the National Counting Centre there, and Andy's been with us all night. William Hague, we heard him mentioned there by the Prime Minister, the Leader of the House of Commons, the former Foreign Secretary. He's with Andrew Neil outside Westminster. Let's join them.
Thanks, Hugh. I am indeed joined by William Hague. Mr Hague, when the Prime Minister outsourced constitutional reform to Gordon Brown during the campaign, was the Cabinet consulted?
Well, this is something we've all discussed in the government.
Was the Cabinet consulted?
The Cabinet has discussed Scotland over many, many months on a regular basis.
Was the Cabinet consulted that it was the Prime Minister's intention to agree a substantially more amount of devolution?
That is already the policy of all three main parties, including the two parties in the coalition. And through all our discussions in the Cabinet over a long time about this whole issue, we've been clear that we are committed to greater devolution to Scotland. Absolutely, yes, of course. What happened?
You knew that Gordon Brown was going to make this Home Rule offer?
Yes, but remember what Gordon Brown has, when you say in this pejorative way, it was outsourced to Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown set out something that all the three main parties of the UK support, which is a timetable for this. The content of those proposals now has to be established.
Because you're not agreed on that.
And the Prime Minister has just set out who is going to chair that process, and that will now take place over the coming weeks.
As you know, there's a growing demand on your own backbenches for more English devolution. The Prime Minister mentioned there the answer to the West Lothian question, English votes for English laws. Is that it? Is that the extent of English devolution?
Well, that is a fundamental issue now, and I think with further devolution to Scotland, it becomes inconceivable to continue to allow Scottish members to vote on everything that is happening in England, when, as you know, English members and indeed Scottish members can't vote on so much of what is happening in Scotland. That is the heart of the issue. But we have, in any case, under this government, been devolving more power to cities, for instance. There may be many more ideas as to how we can do more of that. But how Westminster operates is now at the heart of the issue.
But a lot of your backbenchers now want this Parliament across the road to meet a couple of days a week as an English Parliament. They're even talking about an English executive. Is any of that on the cards?
I don't think people in this country will want it. I don't think our work will lead to a new layer of government, to more expensive government and politics.
So the answer is no.
But it has to lead. Well, we are going to consult widely in this process, so I'm not going to exclude everything at the beginning, but I'm giving a clear steer there on where this will head. The heart of the issue is the decisions about England, Wales, Northern Ireland, just as in Scotland, being made by those elected representatives who represent those places. That's what we have to deal with.
The Prime Minister said he wants to go ahead with a consensus on this. As you know, most people in the Labour Party are against this. They're against English votes for English laws.
Well, we have to discuss this with all the other parties. Of course, if there is no consensus, well, then it is something which at the general election the parties will have to stake out their positions on. But I think there is a strong view in England among the people of England, as well as the Conservative Party and I think many Liberal Democrat members of Parliament as well.
But the Prime Minister also said that he wanted extra Scottish devolution to go in lockstep with more English devolution. If you can't get consensus on the West Lothian question, does that hold up Scottish devolution?
Well, the enactment of what we're all talking about on Scottish devolution is, of course, after the general election. A draft legislation in January, a bill to be introduced, whoever wins the general election in May. So that is to be enacted at the beginning of the next Parliament. I believe that the country can reach a decision. I hope a consensus among the parties, but if not, it can reach a decision in the general election about how we tackle these other issues relating to England and Wales.
But issues of Scottish devolution have been debated and voted on back and forward. We're all familiar with that. This business of more English devolution is relatively new. There's been no national debate about that. Can you tie up English devolution and stick to your Scottish timetable?
Well, that is what that's what we're setting out to do. It's my job to do. But don't write off how much work has been done on this already. You know, we have had the Mackay Commission. I agree with you, there hasn't been the same media and public attention on this issue in recent years as on Scottish devolution. But in this government, the Mackay Commission, for instance, has reported on how English and Welsh MPs can be given the decisive say over legislation
Well,
at
it wasn't
Westminster.
decisive, though, because it said in the end the votes had to be by everybody voting in a UK Parliament, and you will know, your chief whip will have told you, that won't satisfy your backbenchers.
It may well not satisfy me or the Prime Minister. We may well want to go much further and have a clearer and more fundamental solution to it than was put forward in the Mackay Commission. But your earlier point was these things haven't been discussed. Actually, they have been discussed for years.
They haven't been widely debated.
And I think now the time has come to focus attention on these issues and to ensure that all parts of the United Kingdom are fairly represented and people are more closely connected with the decisions made on their behalf.
Part of the promise the Prime Minister made in the election campaign was that despite extra taxation powers to the Scottish Parliament, the Barnett formula, which is generous to Scotland, would remain in place. Is that written in stone?
We are committed to the Barnett formula. All the party leaders committed themselves to that. It has to be added, though, that, of course, as Scotland acquires more tax-raising powers and raises more of its own revenue, the Barnett formula becomes less relevant over time. Scotland would retain the same amount of money to spend, and the Barnett formula becomes a less important component.
So if Scotland raises income tax with this new tax-raising power, the Barnett formula gets cut?
Well, that is how it has been proposed so far. But this is all to be, remember, there is now going to be a process.
Why would the Scottish Parliament do that? It's getting the money coming up from London. The alternative is to raise taxes and it loses the money.
There is now going to be a process over the coming weeks to put these proposals together.
Put a final point to you. You have some really fundamental questions to answer in all of this, and you're not going to do it by May of next year.
I think many of us have thought about these things for a long time. I think, as I say, there have been many reports and many debates about this already. So yes, that is a tight timetable, but it's an absolutely necessary timetable because alongside more devolution for Scotland now go these very important issues about the governing of the rest of the United Kingdom.
William Hague, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Hugh, back to you in Glasgow.
Andrew, thanks very much. Andrew Neil there with the Leader of the House, William Hague. More from our guests in just a moment because I must go to Carol. Lots of you wondering what the weather's doing, so let's go over to Carol, who's at Holyrood.
Lovely. Thank you, Hugh. Well, this morning in Edinburgh, it's quite a dreich start to the day. In fact, if we take a look at the view outside the Scottish Parliament, you can see exactly what I mean. It's cloudy, it's murky, it's damp. We've had some drizzly outbreaks of rain, but it's not just in Edinburgh. We're looking at that forecast. Many eastern areas seeing a similar thing. And we also have scattered showers in the forecast as well. Now, we've had them through the course of the night. Some of them have been heavy and thundery across parts of England and also Wales. And we're going to hang on to them as we go through the course of the day, but they're hit and miss, and in between them there will be some sunshine. So 9 o'clock this morning across Scotland sees a lot of cloud, har coming in from the North Sea and dank conditions. The brightest skies will be around the Moray Firth and the west. Northwest England also seeing some sunshine this morning, but we've got fret and low cloud coming in across the northeast. Now from East Anglia into the Midlands, heading south, this is where we're prone to the showers, and some of those will be intense and thundery, but not all of us will catch them. And as we drift towards the southwest of England, it's a very similar story. Again, we're looking at some thundery showers, a lot of us missing them, but there'll be further thundery showers developing as we go through the course of the day too. For Wales, it's a mixture of bright spells and some showers, some of which will also be heavy and thundery. And then as we sweep across the Irish Sea into Northern Ireland, well, here it's a cloudy, murky start to the day, and through the day we're not immune to some showers, but it should tend to brighten up. So, talking of through the day, on the whole, it is going to be fairly cloudy, particularly in some eastern and central areas. West is best in terms of sunshine, but we'll hang on to those thundery showers with further developing as we go through the course of the afternoon in the south. Not quite as warm as it was yesterday, but our top temperature is still going to be around about 24 Celsius. Now, as we go through the evening and overnight, we still will have those thundery showers and quite a lot of cloud across England and also Wales, meaning it's going to once again be a muggy night, whereas the skies will clear across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here it will be chillier, particularly so in rural areas, with temperatures dipping down into single figures. But it means tomorrow morning we dawn on a bright note for Scotland and Northern Ireland with some sunshine, particularly so in the east, where it has been so cloudy and murky of late. For England and Wales, we start with the thundery showers, but it's an improvement from the north as we go through the course of the day with some sunshine developing. Then into Sunday, another chilly start to the day with some sunshine, mostly dry to start with, but we will see some showers through the day and then further cloud romping in from the North Sea into eastern areas. So in summary, for the weekend, the showers will ease, the cloud will tend to thin and break, and there will be some sunshine around. Now, back to Scotland Decides.
OK, Carol, thank you very much indeed. I have a very impatient John Reid sitting next to me, and that's got him. And Alex Neil is with us from the SNP, who's just joined us. Thank you very much for coming in, Alex.
Pleasure, Hugh.
OK, let's talk about what the Prime Minister had to say and this mechanism, because as Nick and Sarah have just been whispering to me now, there are lots of unanswered questions here. First of all, John, are we clear about the kind of mechanism that is being proposed to deliver change within what would be a record space of time?
Yes, I think we are. I mean, what the PM said, three things. He said, first of all, the decision has been taken by the Scottish people that they want to be part of the United Kingdom. So for the foreseeable future, a generation, as Alex said, let's leave that aside. Secondly, however, there is a demand which has been met by a promise for further enhanced powers for the Scottish Parliament and a timetable set out for that. Let's work on that. And thirdly, he said, we can't do that without looking at the needs in the reformed club, if you like, of the other nations, including the English. I happen to think that's perfectly logical and predictable. Now, I think that he set out the timetable. I think it can be done, but the devil is in the detail. Yeah, it's very, very difficult to work these things out. So if you're a pessimist, you would say, oh, it's all very difficult. If you're an optimist, you say it can be done. Now, I'm a pessimist of the intellect, so I admit the problems, but I'm an optimist of the will. I think that where there's a will, and I hope the SNP, incidentally, join these discussions about the enhanced powers rather than sitting on the side.
The question I was going to ask, Alex, was how ready will the SNP be after this defeat, you know, and all the disappointment? How quickly can you put that behind you to take part in a process?
Well, first of all, the First Minister has confirmed, and I believe in the conversation with the Prime Minister, has confirmed that the SNP government will participate in these talks, because we are always about enhancing the powers of the Scottish Parliament. I think the two key challenges arising out of the Prime Minister's statement are, number one, to try to get agreement, because there is a big differences between what currently the Labour Party proposes, the Tories propose, the Liberals propose, and I think it's going to be very difficult in this timescale to get a consensus on the way forward. The second issue, I think, which the Prime Minister will face in terms of the West Lothian question, people have been looking at this for 40 years, and nobody has come up with a solution.
That's right.
So where are we going to get a solution in 3 or 4 months' time?
The point you were making, Sarah.
Because you have a mechanism that he's announced. This commission, chaired by Lord Smith, is going to look at more powers for the Scottish Parliament, where there are different plans from the different parties, but substantial overlap. And he's committed to the timetable that they will have these plans ready by March. Now, that's ambitious, but probably doable. He then says he's going to answer the West Lothian question. It must be decisively answered, hinting he's going to do that on the same timetable. He doesn't tell us how. There's no commission being set up on that. We don't understand how multi-party talks are going to take place on that. There's much less agreement between the main parties on how to answer the West Lothian question. It's 1978. Tam Daly was standing up in the House of Commons and first asking the West Lothian question. It's been being asked ever since, and no one has yet come up with an answer that Labour and the Tories and the Liberal Democrats can all agree to.
And there was a phrase, wasn't there, that William Hague used, Nick, which was interesting.
In that interview with Andrew Neil, having discussed this so-called English votes for English laws, he then said we may want a clearer and more fundamental solution. I wonder what that means, because there are all sorts of mechanisms that have been looked at in the rules of the House of Commons, where, for example, when a law that affects England only would to start with just be discussed by English MPs, but then when it finally became law, all MPs would get a vote. That's one of the ideas. Why isn't it automatically done? Because the government, particularly if it was a Labour government, dependent on Scottish votes, might find it had a majority when everybody's involved, but not have a majority when England's involved. But what does William Hague mean by a clearer and more fundamental solution? We don't know. It either means an English Parliament, which we're told the Prime Minister has rejected, he doesn't think it's the right idea, or it may mean some arrangement where, in Westminster, MPs sit for 2 days as a UK Parliament and 2 days as a form of English Parliament. I doubt he means that. Or it means much more fundamental devolution of power to regions or to cities. Now, the current fashion, the vogue, interestingly, in all three of the big UK parties, is to give more power to not just the centre of cities, but greater cities. So in the way that Boris Johnson and before him Ken Livingstone has had powers in London, there is an argument the 27 authorities, I think I'm right in saying, around Manchester share many strategic decisions. And it may be that the parties can gravitate towards some solutions which involves the big cities, the Manchesters, the Newcastles, the Bristols, having local authorities that come ahead and a directly elected mayor on top of that, taking really many of the fundamental decisions that are currently taken in the Department of Transport or the Home Office or these other Whitehall departments.
If you're just joining us, it's 7:32 and we are discussing the response to the verdict of the Scottish referendum. And this morning's front pages tell you everything you need to know, really, because they've been updated, obviously, from the ones we saw earlier. And there we have it, a very, very stark and vivid front page for the Scotsman. Scotland says no thanks. Let's have a look at the front page of the Times. And that simply says we stay together, reflecting the jubilation there of the Better Together team. And then if we have a look at the Herald says Scotland says no, but changes UK for good, which is a very, very fair summary of where we are. There is no to independence, but there's no question that this verdict is the catalyst for major change. There'll be more from us here. We'll have more reaction in just a few minutes. But now it's time for the news where you are. Welcome back. It is 7:36 and we are discussing the response and the Prime Minister's response, Mr Salmon's response to the verdict of the people of Scotland. They've decided to reject independence. If you're just joining us here on this BBC referendum special, a 55% to 45% margin for those who rejected the question, should Scotland be an independent country. Prime Minister David Cameron has already been outlining his response, although I think it's fair to say there are quite a few questions around the kind of mechanism he's announced for addressing the needs of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but we can discuss a little more about that. Someone with a very keen eye on the English solution, if I can put it that way, is Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP, and he's with Andrew Neil.
Thanks, Hugh. Nigel Farage is indeed. Nigel Farage, the Prime Minister says that there's going to be more devolution for Scotland, but that'll go in tandem with more devolution for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. What do you understand? What would you want for more devolution for England?
Well, I think we can start today by asking all 59 Scottish MPs, would you please, in a spirit of cooperation and a fair deal, promise that from today you will not debate or vote in the House of Commons on English devolved issues? That'll be a good start. Longer term, this question of finding a new constitutional settlement for the United Kingdom is a big issue. What the Prime Minister has said is he's going to put William Hague in charge of a committee, and over the course of the next few weeks, they're going to cobble together some solution. I think this is too important for that. I think we really do need to have a constitutional convention to find out how a fair federal United Kingdom would work.
But if you had a constitutional convention, which would be long and complicated, that would interfere with the timetable that the three Westminster Party leaders have promised the Scots for further devolution.
Well, it isn't just devolution of power. There is a question of money as well, because what really upset me was, having led a very, very lacklustre campaign, we then saw the three old party leaders making financial promises at the end of the campaign too, promising to maintain the Barnett formula. And I'm sorry, I think, quite honestly, the English taxpayer has been very patient and very quiet throughout all of this. We spend as a nation £1,600 a head more on every Scot than we do on every English person. And I think actually the Barnett formula should be debated openly in the House of Commons. Let's get the country involved in this, because I don't think that English taxpayers should be bound by a last-minute panic promise from the Prime Minister.
Do you think the Barnett formula should be scrapped?
Yes, I do, and so does Joel Barnett, the man who came up with it in the first place all the way back in 1979. Look, I do not wish to be punitive against anybody, but I think England has had a rotten deal out of this, a rotten financial deal.
Well, it gets the oil revenue. The oil revenues come here.
Well, yes,
and that
it does.
kind of balances the money that goes back up with Barnett for extra public spending. It's almost a wash.
Well, that, of course, depends on the price of oil.
Correct.
But again, if we had a proper, open debate about this, perhaps people would find out more. Right at the moment, the English feel put upon, the English feel used, the English feel they're paying too many taxes, and they're rather tired of Scottish MPs voting on English-only issues.
Sounds to me, when people ask the question, who speaks for England, you rather fancy yourself in that role.
Well, I think England needs a voice, and we've heard a lot from Scotland, but the tail cannot go on wagging the dog any longer. England needs a proper voice. Long term, there is a very thorny question, that if we have an English Parliament and an English First Minister, where does that leave the authority of the British Prime Minister? So I accept that not all of this is easy, which is why a long-term solution needs a constitutional convention.
But I'm still not quite clear what your policy is. I understand that you want to answer the West Lothian question by saying Scottish MPs shouldn't vote. I get that point. But what else for England?
Well, a fair financial settlement, and that means revisiting the Barnett formula, that's absolutely clear, and a federal United Kingdom that recognises that all four corners effectively have their own version of home rule.
Then the Scots would have to wait for the devolution they were promised in this referendum.
Nobody knows yet what the timetable is going to be, and frankly, what did that vow mean? It meant we're going to go on paying the same money to Scotland and we're going to give you more powers. It was left pretty vague. I suspect this is all too important to be sorted out in the course of the next few weeks.
There's a number of Tory MPs now talking about the need for an English Parliament, or at least for the Parliament across the road on some days to sit and deal with England-only matters, to give more power to the Welsh, maybe even more power to Northern Ireland. Would you go along with that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, that was UKIP policy and has been for many, many years.
You haven't changed it, because you've changed a lot of policies.
No, that has not changed. We must have English MPs only voting on English issues, and that can start today with the willing cooperation of 59 Scottish MPs.
Are you beginning to think that the English question may be a bigger source of votes for you
than Europe?
I think the way in which we're governed and the feeling that our leaders are completely out of touch with us, whether it's on Europe, the English question or immigration, they're all factors why UKIP's doing well.
Does this give you another locus on speaking to Tory MPs who may be swithering, to use a Scottish word which has been popular recently, and following the route of Mr Carswell?
Well, let's see what happens. You know, if Douglas Carswell wins well on the 9th of October, there'll be other backbench MPs thinking maybe they'd do better next May on a UKIP ticket than a Tory one.
Do you expect to be involved in these constitutional talks?
I'm sure they will do their best to keep us out of everything. They always do. I mean, you know, one of the reasons why Westminster has become so remote is it's become the modern version of the closed shop. You know, three parties that keep it all to themselves and don't think anybody else has got an important point to give. And that perhaps is why getting Carswell into the House of Commons is so important.
I come back to a very important point, though, which is that a lot of people will have voted for the Union, having absorbed, not the postal votes, they were gone, but having absorbed this vow from the three Westminster party leaders, Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, that there would be substantial and speedy devolution, more devolution to Scotland. Gordon Brown even gave us a timetable, which Mr Cameron supports. They'll feel cheated if it all gets sidetracked into a convention about English devolution.
They are going to get more devolved powers. It may take a little bit longer than the promises that were made, but I think the really important thing is, you know, whilst that promise is fine, what I'm not prepared to stand by are financial promises made on my behalf by Mr Cameron, Clegg and Miliband without consulting me.
Well, let me ask you this. You've got two by-elections coming up, right? One in the south, one in the north, one a Tory seat, or was until the man left and joined you, and one a Labour seat. And I assume you hope to do well in both. Does this now become an issue? The matter of English devolution and English finances, is this now going to be an issue for you in the by-elections?
It'll be an issue in both of the by-elections. This is not a Tory issue, it's not a Labour issue, it's not a Lib Dem issue. The question that the English feel they've not had a fair deal and a proper voice, I think, is going up the agenda.
Is this a good day for you?
Well, it's a good day for the Union, because we've stayed together.
You're happy about that?
Very happy about that. And you know, despite a frankly pitiful campaign that was run from Westminster until the last couple of weeks. And it's a good deal at last for England, because this issue that's been buried under the carpet, been considered not quite respectable to talk about, is now there.
And you're going to exploit it as much as you can?
I shall be campaigning for a fair voice for England.
All right, Nigel Farage, thank you very much. Let's go back to Hugh in Glasgow. Hugh?
Andrew, how very interesting. We're listening here very carefully. Douglas Alexander, the Shadow Foreign Secretary for Labour, is with me. Alex Neil is still with us, and Sarah Smith with me too. Well, where do we start on that one, Douglas? Because there was a suggestion, first of all, I mean, we could pick quite a few things, but let's start with that suggestion that the pledge, the vow, whatever you want to call it, isn't that watertight in Mr Farage's eyes. It can be possibly adjusted or stretched or whatever.
Well, we've just defeated one independence party here in Scotland, and I think it just reinforces the need for people to continue to defeat the independence party south of the border. That is UKIP. Frankly, he's not driving the agenda. The three party leaders have come together and agreed a tight but deliverable timetable, which will allow a bill to be produced by January. And nothing that I heard, including a whole litany of factual inaccuracies from Nigel, dissuaded me of the ability to deliver on that timetable.
Is that timetable not affected by the Prime Minister's statement where he talks about setting up a cabinet committee on English government? And he says, we hope to have proposals ready to the same timetable. Now, is that ambition, frankly, going to wreck the other part of it, the Scottish part of it, the delivery of more powers?
The Prime Minister was very clear, and Danny Alexander and other Cabinet members also been clear on this programme, that they are going to deliver on the timetable of a Scotland Bill by 2015. But I think you raise an important point, which is the reason we're able to set out that timetable, a command paper is being produced within a month, is because three parties in Scotland have come together over years, indeed over recent months, to put together fairly complementary but substantial proposals. Those were published in the spring up here in Scotland. And we've also been able to look to a past history of people working cooperatively to a tight but deliverable timetable. The idea that William Hague establishing a cabinet subcommittee is either an adequate answer to the depth of grievance that people feel, not just here in Scotland, but across the UK, about how we are governed, in whose interests we're governed, I think is wholly inadequate. But secondly, he doesn't have the bricks and mortar, if you like, to start the process of that building. Whereas in Scotland, the reason that that vow could be given was because all three parties had done a huge amount of detailed work on very specific proposals.
And the reason, just to underline for viewers, Alex, again, the reason it's so crucial in this context is, as Mr Salmond made clear earlier on, there is an expectation here in Scotland following this very, very important democratic process that's happened. There's an expectation following this verdict that this timetable is stuck to and that it delivers on time.
Well, as Harold Wilson used to say, this is not just a promise, it's a pledge, and I don't think the Cabinet Subcommittee dealing with England can be allowed in any way to delay the implementation of the so-called vow for Scotland. I think the Scottish people would be extremely unhappy if they did not deliver by March next year, because that is the vow they have given, and they'll be expected now to deliver. I'm sure a lot of people who were thinking of voting for independence at the last minute changed their mind and voted no because of the vow. So the vow has to be delivered by the three unionist parties. Now, we've said we'll cooperate, we'll go into the talks, because clearly, as I said earlier, there has to be, the substance of the talks has to be what powers are actually going to be devolved. Now, the reason for the Hague Subcommittee, of course, is to try to preempt those English Tory MPs who have said that they would not vote for or not allowed to go through the House of Commons the legislation on Scotland unless there is some movement in terms of the West Lothian question in relation to England. So that's a fair, I think that's a fair point from their point of view. I mean, if I were representing an English constituency in the House of Commons, I would be wanting that as well. And I think it's a perfectly fair point of view, but we must have an absolute guarantee that Hague Subcommittee and the work of that subcommittee in no way delays the implementation of the vow.
OK,
and let's not forget, and let's not forget the atmosphere in which this is going to be conducted. Now this referendum is out of the way, all the Westminster parties are looking forward to the 2015 general election. This isn't a normal time in the parliamentary calendar. This is when they are all getting ready to fight each other for seats in a general election that's coming up really quite quickly, and only a couple of months after they say they're going to deliver on these devolution pledges. In 35 years, the parties have not been able to come together and answer the West Lothian question. It seems fanciful to imagine that they're going to do that in the 6-month lead up to a general election.
Well, it's ambitious.
Sorry,
very
can I just
quickly,
make
Alex,
one very quick point? John Major has come up with a solution on this, which I think is the closest you'll get to a solution. And basically the solution was give the Scots Devo max and reduce the number of Scottish MPs going to Westminster. Now, that certainly, I think, will be in the mix.
Douglas?
I can't say that immediately finds favour with me. I mean, it seems a curious position to be arguing that, given the conscious choice that we as Scots made last night to stay within the United Kingdom, that somehow the response to that should be to reduce representation within the United Kingdom.
Let's hold that thought.
With Devo max.
Let's hold that thought in combination with, understood. Let's hold that thought for a second, because it is just about 10 to 8, and if you've just joined us, we are talking about the aftermath and the response to the verdict of the voters of Scotland who've rejected independence in yesterday's referendum. So we'll pause the debate for a second and join Carol Kirkwood for the weather. Carol's at the Parliament in Holyrood.
Thank you, Hugh. Good morning from Holyrood. It's quite a cloudy start to the day. If we take a look at the view outside the Scottish Parliament, you can see exactly what I mean. There's a low cloud, it's murky, it's damp. We've had some drizzly outbreaks of rain this morning, and they're set to continue for some time yet. Now, it's not just in Scotland we're looking at this particular view. We've got it across parts of eastern England, and as well as that, we've also got some showers around, scattered showers. We've had some heavy ones through the course of the night. Some of them have also been thundery, and we'll carry on with that scenario across parts of both England and Wales as we go through the course of the day. But the showers are going to be fairly hit and miss, and in between them there'll be some sunshine. Talking of sunshine, Western Scotland faring best today, as indeed is the area around the Moray Firth. The rest of Scotland fairly cloudy and damp. For northwest England, we've also got some sunshine through the course of this morning. We've got fret coming in from the North Sea across the northeast, and then anywhere from East Anglia into the Midlands, heading south south is where we're prone to see those heavy, thundery downpours. Now, as I mentioned, not all of us will catch them, and in between we're looking at bright spells or indeed some sunny intervals. But even into the southwest, as we go through the morning into the afternoon, we're not immune to them, as we've already seen. For Wales too, it's a mixture of some thundery downpours interspersed with bright or sunny skies, and then moving across the Irish Sea into Northern Ireland. It's quite a murky, cloudy start for you, and again the cloud will be thick enough at times for the odd shower, but equally it will brighten up. Now, through the course of the day, we hang on to a lot of cloud across many areas. In the south, we also hang on to those thundery showers, with more developing along the south coast as we head on through the course of the afternoon. Temperatures down a touch on yesterday, but our maximum still a fairly respectable 24 Celsius for the time of the year. Then as we head on through the evening and overnight, well, we still will have some thundery showers, especially so across England and Wales. Here it's going to be quite a humid night. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, under clearer skies, it does mean it's going to be a chillier night, particularly so in rural areas where the temperature will easily get down to single figures. So we start on a bright note tomorrow across Northern Ireland and Scotland. In the east of Scotland, much brighter than it has been because the wind's changing in direction to more of a northwesterly. We also start with some thundery showers across parts of England and Wales, but through the course of the day it's going to brighten up from the north. Temperatures down a touch on today as well. And then as we head on into Sunday, after a chilly, mostly dry start to the day with some sunshine, you'll find through the day 1 or 2 showers will develop, and then we'll have more cloud coming in off the North Sea into eastern areas. So in summary, we're looking at the showers fading as we go through the course of the weekend. The cloud will thin and break, and we'll see some sunshine as well. Now back to Hugh.
Carol, nice positive note on which to end, and we'll see you a little later on. Just wondering really now, at just gone 10 to 8 in the morning, whether the financial markets have taken on board what's happened, and has the pound behaved in any way that we should be noticing? Let's join Simon Jack in the City of London. I think he's at Schroders, and he may have some guests with him too. Simon?
Yes, thanks, Hugh. The action so far overnight has been on sterling. Big gains in the value of the pound. There were 2 key moments. If you look at this chart here, this little spike was when that YouGov poll came out, and then this was Clackmannanshire, when it really looked as if the no vote had some wind in its sails, very near 2-year highs. A couple of weeks ago, the financial markets didn't think it was even a close-run thing. You can see this was the value of the pound against the dollar. As those opinion polls got closer, the value of the pound began to fall. Now it's on its way back up again. The stock market opens in 5 minutes' time. Expect gains there for RBS and Lloyds. Of course, they had some the question marks over where they were going to be domiciled in the event of a yes vote. Businesses also came off the bench quite late on in this campaign. We can talk now to the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, John Longworth. And John, the business lobby left this one late. What have you learned from this campaign?
Well, of course, we represent businesses in Scotland and England, Wales and Northern Ireland, so we were completely neutral at British Chambers of Commerce. But I know that there will be very many businesses in Scotland who will be mightily relieved with this result. Clearly, it was very important for Scottish businesses, even more so than the rest of the UK.
Any lasting damage from this, do you think, in terms of confidence to invest, or do you think we've seen this one off for the time being?
I think that actually we can now go on to long-term sustainable growth, really great growth in the economy if we do the right things. Very, very important that Alex Salmond doesn't actually imply, of course, that this is not the end of the matter, because that will affect investment, particularly in Scotland.
OK, and there's also still some uncertainty about how this devolution will work, also powers to the regions in the UK, so there's still some uncertainty there.
Yes, when we survey businesses up and down the country, I talk to businesses all the time, there's no question that there's a real appetite in the English regions, in London and the devolved administrations for more spending and tax powers, for more control over local economic development. No desire for an extra layer of government, of course, although politicians will love that, so we should avoid that. And there's also, no doubt, a desire in the rest of the UK for the resolution to the English question of Scottish MPs voting on English matters.
And there had been some talk that a yes vote would have made a UK exit from the European Union more likely. Is that a good thing for business, that that's been settled as well? Well, I mean, it's not been settled. We've obviously got a referendum about it, but the Brexit, as it was so-called, was seen as more likely if Scotland went.
The majority of businesses in our network want to remain in the single market of the European Union, but not at any price. So actually they support the Prime Minister's position on renegotiation. The real lesson from this, of course, is that our politicians are not really very good at high-stakes poker, so they're going to have to sharpen up their act when it comes to negotiating with the EU.
OK, John Longworth from the British Chambers of Commerce. Many thanks. Stock market, Hugh, opens in about 5 minutes. Expect gains there for RBS, and Lloyd's strong gains on the pound.
Simon, thank you very much. Thanks for your guests too for bringing us right up to date with what's been going on in the financial markets. Douglas Alexander, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, will be leaving us in a second. A final thought from you after the events of the night, Douglas?
A momentous decision, a momentous night, and I think a great, great day for Scotland. I couldn't be more proud of the decision that we've made to work for faster, safer and better change than the risks of separation. The choice was ours, but the consequences are going to be felt in every part of the United Kingdom. I think it's a very good day, not just for Scotland, but for the whole of the United Kingdom.
Well, there's certainly more questions to be answered, but thank you very much for being with us, Douglas, and we'll see you soon. In the meantime, what's the time? 4 minutes to 8. It's time for the news where you are. A very good morning. It is 8 o'clock on Friday, the 19th of September, and we are reporting the result of the Scottish referendum on independence. And by a hefty margin, 55% to 45%, the people of Scotland have decided to reject independence and to stay with the United Kingdom. And there we have it. On the BBC's headquarters, Pacific Quay in Glasgow, 1.5 million votes in favour of splitting. It's a very significant number, and 1.9 million deciding to stay with the union. So the verdict is clear, but the pattern of voting is interesting. It opens lots of questions, and the turnout at around 85–86% is really a matter to wonder at. We've never seen anything like it in the modern era of politics. So it's quite an impressive performance all round and a great advert for Scottish democracy after yesterday's referendum. So we'll have lots more reaction. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander, has just joined us. Danny, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. We'll have a few words from you in just a moment, because I think we should catch up now with all the night's events, and Charlie State has the news for us.
Hugh, thank you. Good morning. David Cameron has welcomed Scotland's decision to remain within the United Kingdom, saying he was delighted that voters wanted to keep the country of four nations together. In an unprecedented turnout, the No campaign won by a margin of 55% to 45%. It was a disappointing night for the Yes campaign, which was ahead in only 4 areas. Scotland's First Minister, Alex Salmond, has said he accepts defeat, but called on the main British parties to honour their pledge to devolve more powers to Scotland. Our political correspondent, Ian Watson, has been following the night's events.
That's a word they're not used to saying. This is the official No campaign, Better Together, celebrating Scotland saying no to independence. Their mood was in stark contrast to his, the leader of the Yes campaign, Alex Salmond, on the verge of conceding defeat as he left Aberdeenshire. By the time he'd arrived in Edinburgh, the brave face was back, and he decided to accentuate the positive.
Thank you to Scotland for 1.6 million votes for Scottish independence.
Then he called on his supporters to accept defeat.
I accept that verdict of the people, and I call on all of Scotland to follow suit in accepting the democratic verdict of the people of Scotland.
And the leader of the Better Together campaign declared that a no vote didn't mean no change.
But as we celebrate, let us also listen. More than 85% of the Scottish population has voted. People who were disengaged from politics have turned out in large numbers.
In Downing Street, the Prime Minister promised more devolution for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but said the question of independence had been decisively answered.
Now the debate has been settled for a generation, or as Alex Salmond has said, perhaps for a lifetime. So there can be no disputes, no reruns. We have heard the settled will of the Scottish people.
But he suggested as a price of more devolution for Scotland, then Scottish MPs might have fewer rights at Westminster.
We have heard the voice of Scotland, and now the millions of voices of England must also be heard. The question of English votes for English laws, the so-called West Lothian question, requires a decisive answer.
The first council to declare set the tone for the rest of the night.
No, 19,000. 19,036.
Clackmannanshire in central Scotland was the first council area to declare, with the majority of voters saying no. That sounded the alarm for the Yes campaign. It was clear that the momentum was with their opponents.
Hereby declare.
The results came thick and fast, though mostly from smaller island councils such as Orkney and Shetland, again with majorities for no.
To the referendum.
The Yes campaign did get the consolation of winning in Glasgow, Scotland's largest city.
Yes, 194,000. No, 169,347.
Turnout has been high, from 75% in Glasgow to more than 90% in Stirling, and there were high spirits here at the No campaign when they heard that a majority of voters had decided to embrace the Union and voted for Scotland to stay in the UK. Ian Watson, BBC News, Glasgow.
Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP, has called for a debate about how funding for the devolved nations is decided.
the English taxpayer has been very patient and very quiet throughout all of this. You know, we spend as a nation £1,600 a head more on every Scot than we do on every English person. And I think actually the Barnett formula should be debated openly in the House of Commons. Let's get the country involved in this, because I don't think that English taxpayers should be bound by a last-minute panic promise from the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister has also announced this morning the appointment of Lord Smith of Kelvin to oversee the implementation of more devolution. Lord Smith was the chair of the organising committee for the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow earlier this year. David Cameron says Scotland will be given more control over tax, spending and welfare. He said draft legislation would be ready by January. Well, politicians on both sides have praised the record turnout in the referendum. Around 85% of registered voters went to the ballot box. Thousands of people stayed up all night to watch the results come in, with many lining the streets to wait for the news. Our correspondent Robert Piggott joined the crowds.
George Square in Glasgow, so often at the heart of the Yes campaign, defiant this morning in the face of a mounting vote for maintaining the union. As voting took place on Thursday, there was a carnival atmosphere here. As the results trickled through, the mood changed to anger and disappointment.
An extraordinary, fiercely fought campaign has reached its tumultuous end. The passion and intensity of the debate is being matched by the emotional reaction to its outcome.
This was the first ever time I vote, and I teared up. Like, it was the most emotional experience of my life, and I loved it. I'll do it every time now.
Hopefully the next time round people will make the right decision and they'll vote yes next time.
But for Better Together campaigners, elation as count after count showed the no vote ahead. Success had been by no means certain. It made each victory all the sweeter. But outside Holyrood in Edinburgh, young Yes campaigners were coming to terms with defeat. Many Scots took part in the electoral process for the first time and have been left disappointed, some disillusioned. They'll be watching as negotiations begin over the new powers Scotland has been promised. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
That's this morning's main news. Now back to Scotland Decides.
Charlie, thank you very much. Well, I mentioned earlier that Danny Alexander, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, a Liberal Democrat, Scottish MP, just joined us. Good morning to you, Danny. And John Curtis has joined us at the desk, which is rather nice. John.
I'm honoured, Hugh. I'm honoured.
Well, listen, I've been asking for it all night, but there you go. You've turned up now, which is great. So before I bring Danny in, and Alex Neil is still with us, and Sarah too, John, let's have some considered thoughts on what we've heard this morning from David Cameron, earlier from Alex Salmond, about the process that is now underway.
Well, I suppose if I were being unkind, I would say that the exercise that's now going to be attempted is that, if you'll excuse the phrase, the fag end of a government is going to attempt to come up with a new constitutional settlement for Scotland, and at the same time try to solve one of the most difficult political questions that arises as a consequence of that, the West Lothian question. I guess everybody will wish them the best of luck, but I think they have given themselves a quite considerable task to achieve.
Do you think it's impossible?
Well, I mean, the truth is that so far nobody's managed to come up with an answer to the West Lothian question that certainly can achieve any consensus. The coalition government did get Sir William Mackay to come up with, to examine the issue, and he came up with what some of us regard as a not unsensible idea, which is that it's somewhere along the stage of the passage of English legislation, there should be an indicative vote of English MPs only, just to check that English MPs were in favour of it. But listening to the Leader of the House this morning, William Hague, he seemed to be suggesting that wasn't going to be good enough. Well, that therefore implies not only do the parties actually have to try and come to an agreement about what they want to do for Scotland, and we know there's quite a lot of difference between them, but apparently we're also going to start from scratch yet again in trying to solve the West Lothian question. I mean, I think the honest truth is, and as Sarah said in the last hour, given that this exercise is now going to be attempted, when what really all three unionist parties now want to do, having saved Scotland for the Union, is to fight each other in order to win power in May 2015, one can certainly see plenty of reasons why this enterprise may not succeed.
Why would it succeed, Danny?
Well, I think it will succeed because we've committed to making it succeed. I think the most important feature of this referendum today, apart from the overwhelming democratic participation that we've all been commenting on through the course of the night, is the very strong mandate it gives to deliver the change for Scotland within the United Kingdom. I feel a great sense of humility and a great sense of responsibility for delivering that, to do so on a cross-party basis. Delighted that Alex Salmond has said that the SNP would want to be involved in that process too, and to engage the wider community in Scotland. There are lots of ideas already on the table in respect of further devolution to Scotland, and I want us to deliver as ambitious and positive a package as possible for Scotland, so that we can show the people of Scotland that the faith that they've shown in the United Kingdom in this referendum will be repaid.
That's understood. So that's the Scottish response, if I can call it that. You know, we understand the shape of that. It's this hooking on, if you like, of an attempted solution for the English problem, which we're just looking at. Where is the timetable of that? We will set up a cabinet committee right away, and proposals will also be ready to the same timetable. Now, John is suggesting, Nick was suggesting, Sarah was suggesting, Alex was suggesting. That's just not remotely possible. Why? Try and convince us. How will that work?
Well, the whole point is to try and achieve a consensus around these issues too. I think one of the remarkable things about this referendum is that it has not just inspired a debate in Scotland, but also a debate across the rest of the United Kingdom. John made reference to the Mackay Commission proposals, which are not about diminishing the rights of Scottish MPs, but about strengthening the engagement of English MPs. That provides a useful starting point for the conversation.
William Hague clearly was not too impressed with that. He talked about a more fundamental solution, which suggested something much more radical.
Well, I didn't hear what William Hague said. I think that the Mackay Commission, as I say, provides a good basis to start from.
It's just that your search for consensus is already slightly unravelling, isn't it? That's the point.
Well, the whole point of searching for consensus is that people start with different views and you bring them together. That's what we've done in the course of the process for further devolution for Scotland. I'm quite sure that we can do that too for these wider questions. And by the way, it's not just in England that there's a debate. There's also a debate in Wales too. You'll have followed that, and you know, the Silk Commission is being delivered, but again, we need to have a further conversation about that. As a member of a party that has long believed in constitutional reform at a UK level and moving towards a federal United Kingdom, which is what I believe in, I think this is a great opportunity to take all of those debates forward.
You know, there's a very strong view in Wales that the Barnett formula is a bit of a disaster and shouldn't be pursued, but Gordon Brown has been very firm about it. What is your view on the Barnett formula?
Well, I think the Barnett formula works well for all parts of the United Kingdom.
Really?
It was part of the...
It should take you down to Cardiff.
Well, hold on. Let me finish. It was part of the statement that was made by the three UK party leaders over the course of the last week. In Wales, there's a specific issue about convergence of funding. And there is the idea, which we've agreed to look at already with the Welsh Assembly Government, about a floor under Barnett in respect of Wales. That's something which is an idea that, I think an idea whose time has come, to be honest, which I think is a way of answering that specific Welsh concern, but within the framework of a funding system which actually does meet the needs of all parts of the United Kingdom.
Now, Danny, I want you to look at this screen because we have a result.
Oh, at last, a result from my own area.
That you know rather well.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so let's put the
I'm delighted to see a strong
This
no
is the
from
last
the
result. Okay, so this doesn't affect the outcome, obviously, but here we are. This is number 32 of the declarations, which started many hours ago, and the Highland region. This is the local authority region of Highland, has voted no, 87,000 to 78,000. The percentages for us, 53% voting no and 47% voting for independence, on a very high turnout again of 87%, which will give you some pleasure then, will it?
I'm very pleased to see that the Highlands have voted no, in common with most of the rest of Scotland, but of course there is a very strong body of yes support there too, and I think the whole thing we have to do now in the Highlands and across the country is bring Scotland together again, and I think this process of further devolution is one of the tools for doing that. And you know, I think Alex and I and our colleagues in all parties need to work together now to ensure that Scotland comes together. I think part of that process also has to be, and it's certainly been part of the debate in the Highlands, is not just more powers for Scotland, but more powers devolved within Scotland to localities. I think one of the issues we've seen in the Highlands particularly is a centralisation of power to Edinburgh. And very much part of the debate that we've been having in the Highlands is how can we have devolution within Scotland as well as devolution to Scotland, and I want that to be taken forward too.
I want us just to look at this because this is now the official final tally that we have after 32 results have been declared in this independence referendum. So it's 8:15. on the morning after referendum day, and this is the official final result. 32 results declared. More than 2 million votes against independence. 1.6 million votes in favour of independence, and as lots of people have been pointing out quite rightly, that is a very, very high number of people voting for the breakup of the United Kingdom, or breakup of Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom. So that's the reason that there's so much pressure to address that issue. And if you look at the turnout across Scotland, a healthy, impressive 85%. We've seen nothing like that in a national poll of this kind. And if we look at the percentages, there we are, just confirming the ones that John gave us earlier, 55% to 45%. And I have to say, this is something maybe we'll pick up again, John, later, that is actually a much bigger margin than the vast majority of the opinion polls had suggested. Most of them were suggesting a modest lead for the No campaign, but lots of them within the margin of error. But there you are, it's a 10% margin after the votes have been counted. Sarah, you wanted to respond to what something Danny was saying.
Yes, I was very interested in... Danny was able to say that the three UK parties have a broad consensus on new powers for Scotland. Now, that's in part because we've been having this referendum campaign for 2 years now in Scotland. Every detail of constitutional change has been pored over by the political parties and by the voters. And what it's thrown up is a decisive result in favour of staying with the Union, a very sizable minority of people who wanted to vote for independence, who will insist that real change is delivered to Edinburgh. And that instantly casts this question on London on what happens to English votes. Now, they have not been talking about this for 2 years. They have not reached broad consensus between the parties about this. There hasn't been a debate going on with English voters. There hasn't been one going on with English MPs. Just now, Conservative MP Rob Wilson is saying there was never any doubt about a no vote in Scotland. The same is now true of English votes for English MPs. Nothing less is acceptable. That's what Tory MPs are saying. I assume that for Danny Alexander, English votes for English MPs is not an acceptable solution.
Let's pause. I know you're about to say something. In a few moments, I hope to be talking to Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, who's at Balmoral, and I'm interested in what Nick has to say. We'll be joining Nick in a couple of minutes. That's after the weather with Carol.
Thank you, Hugh. Good morning from Edinburgh. You can see behind me, it's a fairly dreich start to the day. And if we take a look at the view outside the Scottish Parliament, there's a lot of low cloud around. It's misty, it's murky, and it's damp. And that is the picture across many eastern and central parts of the UK. But as well as that, we've also got some scattered showers. Now, overnight and this morning, some of those have been torrential across parts of England and Wales, particularly of late across parts of East Devon. And as well as being torrential, they're also thundery, and they're going to rumble on for a wee while yet. So this morning across Scotland, the brightest spots will be in the west and around the Murray Firth. Elsewhere, it's fairly cloudy. We've got Har coming in from the North Sea. We've got Fret coming in across the northeast of England, but the northwest seeing some sunshine. Then as we come down towards the Midlands and East Anglia, heading down towards the south coast, this is where we're prone to the thundery downpours, as we've already had. They are isolated, not all of us catching one, and in between them, we're looking at bright skies or indeed some sunshine. But I've mentioned the heavy ones around East Devon at the moment. They're set to carry on as we go through the course of the morning. And for Wales too, we're not immune to those thundery downpours, but in between, we're looking at some brighter skies and also some sunshine. It's a murky start to the day, though, for Northern Ireland. Here, too, a lot of low cloud and some misty conditions, but it should brighten up, although we can't completely rule out a shower as we go through the course of the day. So we hang on to a lot of cloud today, especially in eastern and central areas. The showers continue across parts of England and Wales, and we'll see further heavy thundery showers develop in the south as we go through the afternoon. Temperature-wise, well down a touch on yesterday, but nonetheless, we still are looking at highs around 24 Celsius. Now, as we head on through the evening and overnight, the thundery showers continue to rumble on. There'll be a lot of cloud around across England and Wales, and here it's going to be a humid night. But where the cloud clears across Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, it's going to be chillier than it has been, and in rural areas, we're looking at temperatures down into single figures. So we start tomorrow for Scotland and Northern Ireland on a bright note with some sunshine. In the east, much brighter than it has been for most of this week. For England and for Wales, there'll be some showers rumbling away first thing in the morning, but there will be an improvement from the north as we go through the course of the day. And after a chilly start on Sunday, many of us getting off to a dry and a bright note. But through the course of the day, more cloud will romp in from the North Sea into eastern areas, and temperature-wise, again, down a touch. We'll see a few showers develop as well. So in essence, as we head on through the course of the weekend, most of the showers will tend to fade, the cloud will break, and there will be some sunshine around as well, Hugh.
Carol, once again, thank you very much. It's 8:20 here at the BBC's headquarters in Glasgow, and we've been talking about the aftermath, the response to the independence referendum result, a 55% to 45% victory for the No campaign. Last night, at 10 o'clock, it seems a very long time ago, I was talking to our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell at Balmoral, talking there about where the Queen was monitoring the results and some thoughts on attitudes there. Nick, your thoughts this morning?
Hugh, I think undoubtedly there will be tremendous relief inside Balmoral there. I know that the Queen's senior officials have been up all night following the results, and I'm sure that they, of course, will have been keeping her closely involved. And her private feelings must be ones of relief and pleasure that the United Kingdom is not going to break itself up. And this can't have been easy for her at her age, at this point in her reign, to have had to contemplate the possible breakup of the United Kingdom. Now, she has kept her feelings very much to herself. She's very much aware of where the line is, her responsibilities as a constitutional monarch. She made that one observation after church up there at Crathy last Sunday. And I dare say, you know, that there may have been some members of the family who were urging her to speak out and say rather more. But that is what she judged it was appropriate for her to say, to retain her neutrality away from the politics. Now, in terms of today, what I think we will get later this afternoon, perhaps, is a short written statement from the Queen, and I would imagine that that will be a statement to the effect that the decision has been taken, that we should now move on, because I think that the divisiveness of the campaign is something that has been of considerable concern to her. So, although we clearly at this stage don't know the details of any statement that is issued, if, as we expect, there is a statement this afternoon, I'm sure that it will urge the people of Scotland to accept the result, to move on in the interests of Scotland.
Nick, once again, thanks very much. Nicholas Witchell there at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire. And if there's any more from Nick on that written statement, if we get it, we'll bring it to you straight away. So let's update you on the story of the night. It's been a very long night. We've been on the air here since 20 to 11 last night, and we got the final declaration in Danny's area, Danny Alexander's area in Highlands, just a few minutes ago. But we've got that final official tally in now, and let Jeremy tell us the story of how it happened. Jeremy?
Here, then, is the final percentage after this referendum. Yes on 45%, no on 55%, a clear 10% margin for the noes, wider than anything the polls were telling us, really, in the fortnight running up to this dramatic day and night of voting and counting. Let me show you the map of Scotland after this result. We've coloured in areas where the noes won red. So have a look at this. So the noes in red, and almost the whole of Scotland covered. You can see, though, the 4 areas where the yes votes were ahead. Those 3, Glasgow and surrounding, and then Dundee in the northeast. But largely the map has been covered red. And if I take you back to our councils here, these are the 32 council areas in which the voting was counted. And you can see awash with red here. So many red councils, looking for the 4 green ones. If I reorder them, we'll find them. Glasgow, the biggest, went for yes, 53%. So did North Lanarkshire, another big council. That went for yes. It wasn't enough, though. Edinburgh, Fife, South Lanarkshire, Aberdeenshire, the other huge councils going no. And the first results we had came in on the smaller councils. Clackmannanshire, Shetland, Orkney, all coming in early in the evening, all going no. And it was quite some time before Dundee City became our first yes. So, after this extraordinary night, I can show you here a spread of these council areas with the noes on this side and the yeses on this side. And again, this just illustrates, you won't call it a whitewash, this no margin, but it's certainly a very convincing victory to those who argued that Scotland should stay in the United Kingdom. Look at these 4 councils here. These were the 4 yeses: Dundee City, West Dunbartonshire, Glasgow, North Lanarkshire. Those were the only 4 yeses of 32 councils. Come down with me and you see the other councils. You'll see the margins increasing as you come down here until we get to the councils which voted no most decisively. Scottish Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, for example. Conservative leading on the border with England. Orkney and Shetland, the island councils. But yes, this was convincing. As you can see, in the end, only 4 council areas going with the arguments of those who said that Scotland should leave the UK.
Jeremy, once again, thank you very much. Jeremy there with the blocks that tell us exactly what happened. And indeed, when you see the map, I mean, the map is pretty dramatic, isn't it? When you see the red, it is to do with the nature of some of the areas. But, yeah, it's the concentration of votes in some of the smaller areas too. So we'll have more chat in a second. But now it's time for the news where you are.
Thank you.
It is just about 8:30 here on BBC One, and we are looking at the result of the referendum in Scotland and considering the implications of it. It is a very clear result. And here at the headquarters of BBC Scotland, on Pacific Quay in Glasgow, we are broadcasting these figures for you. The yes campaign attracted 1.6 million voters, a very considerable number, favouring independence, but they were beaten by the No campaign, who attracted just over 2 million voters. The margin in terms of percentages, 55 to 45, so a very healthy 10% margin for the No campaign. We'll have more response in just a moment, but Charlie State has the news summary for us.
Hugh, thank you. Good morning. David Cameron has welcomed Scotland's decision to remain within the United Kingdom, saying he was delighted that voters wanted to keep the country of four nations together. In an unprecedented turnout, the No campaign won by a margin of 55% to 45%. It was a disappointing night for the Yes campaign, which was ahead in only 4 areas. Scotland's First Minister, Alex Salmond, has said he accepts defeat, but called on the main British parties to honour their pledge to devolve more power to Scotland. Our political correspondent, Ian Watson, has been following the night's events.
That's a word they're not used to saying. This is the official No campaign, Better Together, celebrating Scotland saying no to independence. Their mood was in stark contrast to his, the leader of the Yes campaign, Alex Salmond, on the verge of conceding defeat as he left Aberdeenshire. By the time he'd arrived in Edinburgh, the brave face was back, and he decided to accentuate the positive.
Thank you to Scotland for 1.6 million votes for Scottish independence.
Then he called on his supporters to accept defeat.
I accept that verdict of the people, and I call on all of Scotland to follow suit in accepting the democratic verdict of the people of Scotland.
And the leader of the Better Together campaign declared that a no vote didn't mean no change.
But as we celebrate, let us also listen. More than 85% of the Scottish population has voted. People who were disengaged from politics have turned out in large numbers.
In Downing Street, the Prime Minister promised more devolution for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but said the question of independence had been decisively answered.
Now the debate has been settled for a generation, or as Alex Salmond has said, perhaps for a lifetime. We have heard the voice of Scotland, and now the millions of voices of England must also be heard. The question of English votes for English laws, the so-called West Lothian question, requires a decisive answer.
Turnout has been high, from 75% in Glasgow to more than 90% in Stirling, and there were high spirits here at the No campaign when they heard that a majority of voters had decided to embrace the Union and voted for Scotland to stay in the UK. Ian Watson, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, the Prime Minister has also announced this morning the appointment of Lord Smith of Kelvin to oversee the implementation of more devolution. Lord Smith was the chair of the organising committee for the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow earlier this year. David Cameron says Scotland will be given more control over tax, spending and welfare. He said draft legislation will be ready by January. Well, politicians on both sides have praised the record number of people in Scotland who voted in the referendum. More than 84% of eligible voters had their say at the ballot box, with turnout in some areas reaching more than 90%. Thousands of people stayed up all night to watch the results come in, with many lining the streets to wait for the outcome.
Hopefully the next time round people will make the right decision and they'll vote yes next time.
Absolutely delighted. Worried. Walking around Edinburgh kind of the last few days, there's so many yeses in windows and kind of badges and stuff, and yeah, very glad.
This was the first ever time that I vote, and I teared up. Like, it was the most emotional experience of my life, and I loved it.
The London financial market has opened this morning with the FTSE unchanged as polls closed last night. The pound hit a 2-year high against the euro. In the last hour, the Confederation of British Industry has said there's been a collective sigh of relief across the business community in reaction to the no vote. The Royal Bank of Scotland has reconfirmed its commitment to Scotland, saying it's business as usual for its customers. That's this morning's main news. Now back to Hugh and Scotland Decides.
Charlie, thank you very much. Charlie Slate there with the news summary for us. We've had the official declaration from the Chief Counting Officer, Mary Pitcaithley. She's based at Ingleston, and she's been overseeing this enormous exercise overnight. It's been an incredibly smooth process. One or two little logistical things which could not have been foreseen, but they've really been overcome. This was the official announcement made just a few minutes ago.
The total number of votes cast in favour of each answer to the referendum question for the whole of Scotland is as follows. Yes, the number of votes 1,617,989. No, the number of votes 2,001,926. There were 3,429 rejected papers. The reasons for rejection are as follows. Want of an official mark, 16 papers. Voting in favour of both answers, 691 papers. Writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, 168 papers. Unmarked or void for uncertainty, 2,554 papers.
Well, there you have it. That is the official announcement by the Chief Counting Officer, the official announcement of the result of this referendum. And it is, as we've been stating for the past hour or so, having had the official tallies in, it is a convincing win for the No campaign. But having said that, a significant number of people voting for independence nonetheless. So let's talk a little bit about the business response. It's going on, of course. The markets opened earlier at 8 o'clock. Steph McGovern, my colleague, is with business leaders in central Edinburgh. Let's join her now.
Yes, good morning to you, Hugh. Morning, everybody. The mist is just starting to clear here in Edinburgh. Everyone getting ready for a day at work. I'm in the financial district in Edinburgh and I'm with some of the key business people who've been speaking out on both sides of the debate. First of all, Sir Brian Souter. Good morning to you, Sir Brian. A smile on your face, but you're probably disappointed with the result, are you?
Yes, as a protagonist of independence, I'm naturally disappointed, but I think we've achieved a great deal with the campaign. We've been guaranteed the Barnett formula, which is important for funding our education and health services. We've been guaranteed additional powers from Westminster, and we've acted as a catalyst to change the politics of the UK. So I think it's been an amazing result, and the way people were galvanised together, people that hadn't voted for 30, 40 years participated. I think there's been some real amazing results from this, and overall I think I'm very happy with that.
We've heard Nicola Sturgeon say that although it didn't go their way, it didn't go to the Yes campaign, that this will lead to change. Do you think it will?
Well, I think it has to, and I think we will hold the unionist politicians to the changes that they are promising. But I do believe that the change will be much wider than that. I think we have to address the issue of the English regions, the West Lothian question. Some of these questions that haven't been answered need to really be answered for the future. And I think that the people of Scotland are leading the way in what I think is a complete democratisation of our politics and a renewal of interest in politics. I think that's just very exciting to be part of that. I'm delighted that we've been able to galvanise that and be part of that process.
And in terms of this commission being headed by Lord Smith of Kelvin, what are you hoping to hear from that when it reports in November?
Well, I'm hoping that we're going to get real fiscal autonomy to the Holyrood Parliament. I'm hoping that we'll get a number of levers that are important to trigger the economy. I mean, we have some promises already. We need to create a really dynamic economy in Scotland, and we need more power to do that. We want to attract business to come and invest here and locate here, and I'm actually quite excited about that. And I think the message for business is Scotland is open for business, and I think the message to the politicians is that business can't be for them the same again. They need to change.
Okay, so Brian Souter, thank you very much for your time. Also with me, I have Gavin Hewitt, former Chief Executive of the Scotch Whisky Association. You didn't want Scotland to become independent. It hasn't. What's your reaction?
Very relieved, and I think business in Scotland will be very relieved. It removes a great deal of uncertainty.
And for businesses, do you think that uncertainty is completely gone? Because there are still changes afoot, aren't there?
No, of course there are changes, and as Sir Brian mentioned, there are things afoot. There are tax devolution of further powers, but we can work with government. Business can work with government to make sure that that is in the interest of Scotland and also in the interest of the United Kingdom. And I think it's very important that we need to galvanise and actually encourage enterprise, create jobs, and I think it's very important that Scotland has those powers and uses those powers effectively for the betterment of Scotland.
And also with us is Anne Richards from Aberdeen Asset Management. What has the reaction overall been from business?
I think business is glad that we have retained a single market for goods and services right across the UK. And I think some of the uncertainty around currency and for financial services for my industry around regulation and the continuing involvement of the Bank of England. So I think that uncertainty has been removed. We're all used to dealing with some level of uncertainty in our businesses, and although there'll be some uncertainty to come from some of these political changes that we're talking about, that's part of business as usual, I think, for most businesses.
We've seen the pound rally overnight, which suggests that the markets are happy with the no vote. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's right. I think, as I said, some of this uncertainty has been taken away, and you've seen that particularly around sterling. I think as we go into next week, this little bit of a relief rally, specifically on the back of the Scottish referendum, will be overtaken by events elsewhere, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in some of the political uncertainty we're seeing in the Middle East. So it will be back to business as usual, I think, on Monday morning.
Brilliant. Well, thank you also for your time this morning. Thank you to all of you who've stood out in the drizzle with me this morning. Thank you very much. That's it from me here in Edinburgh.
Steph, thank you very much. Thanks to your guests too for braving the elements. Danny, some thoughts on business reaction?
Well, I think a cloud of uncertainty has been lifted from the Scottish economy. We've seen a positive reaction on the financial markets this morning. There's been an overwhelming sense from business that they just want the clarity to get on with investment. I think now we will see a spurt of growth in the Scottish economy because there have been investment plans that have been on hold. Quite a lot of people have just pressed the pause button, waiting to see the results. I think especially with the decisive nature of the result of the referendum and the clarity from Alex Salmond that he sees this as a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime event, that gives people the confidence now to go forward and invest in Scotland as part of the wider UK economic recovery. We're creating jobs and growth, and we need that to continue.
And just to nail that line as well, Alex, if I may, the once-in-a-generation thing, the once-in-a-lifetime thing, do you see any prospect of this question being revisited within 20 years?
I think a lot will depend actually on whether the UK parties now deliver on the promise and the vow and how much power they actually give us. I mean, Brian Souter mentioned fiscal autonomy, and I think we need substantial additional economic powers. And at the end of the day, if the Scottish people don't believe that they're getting enough, then I'm not saying there's going to be another referendum on independence in 2 or 3 years' time, but certainly they will be pressing for very substantial change. And if these guys don't deliver it, they will pay a heavy political price, because we'll get 2 elections coming up in the next 18 months. We'll get the 2015 UK election and we'll get the 2016 Scottish Parliament election. If they don't deliver, I believe the people of Scotland, including many people who voted no yesterday, will treat them very severely indeed.
OK, we'll be back with you in a second. What I want to do now, because we are rapidly approaching the end of this part of the broadcast, this marathon, why don't we pay one last visit to Jeremy, who's been guiding us through lots of this landscape throughout the night. And Jeremy, the story, if you like, of the victory of the No campaign.
Hugh, what an amazing day and what an amazing night of voting and counting. Here are the 32 council areas that became the battleground. And let me take you through what happened hour by hour. So the first councils to come in at 1 a.m, just after Clackmannanshire and Orkney. And you see already the No campers starting to take a lead. A small one. These are small councils. Then we have island councils again, Shetland, Eleanor Shear. And again, the No camp just slightly ahead. Still waiting for the first council area to vote yes. Between 3 and 4, we had Inverclyde and Dundee. Dundee did say yes, and you can see then that the yes camps start to gain ground. You're wondering, can they overtake the no's? But Falkirk and Stirling and others between 4 and 4:30 saw the no's go into an even stronger lead. And then something dramatic happened. Between 4:30 and 5 in the morning, we got the result from the biggest council in Scotland, from Glasgow. A huge number of votes, which took the tallies all the way down this balcony to here, but not far enough to put the yeses in the lead. The noes, the red votes, were still in the lead. So between 5 and 6 in the morning, when South Ayrshire and East Ayrshire came in, the BBC was able to forecast the result would be no. And then at 6:10, Fife Council declared, and the noes crossed the winning line. Fife is a big council, and this took them past the winning line. The yeses had no hope now of winning, and to add insult to injury, Moray and the Highlands also voted no. So the final result in terms of numbers of votes, we can see now. Yes, the losing side, 1,617,989. No, go past 2 million votes, 2,001,926. The number of voters who rejected the idea of Scotland leaving the UK. Scotland voted no.
Jeremy, thank you very much for underlining the result for us and putting it on the big screen so that there's no mistake about it. Yes, Scotland has voted no, and we're gathering more reaction. And my colleague Naga Manchetti is at the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood. Naga, I think, has a guest with her to talk about the response.
Your thoughts are correct, Hugh. Good morning, everybody. We are here outside the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood. Lots of people have been gathered around out there, voicing their opinions after a night of quite an intense enskyment. We've got Brian Cox with us, actor, hello, and rector of Dundee University as well. How are you feeling? You've been campaigning for the yes.
I have. I feel very good, actually, surprisingly. I was a wee bit cheesed off this morning, but really I'm very proud. I'm very proud of Scotland. I'm very proud of what we've done. This is a... You know, I knew it would be, and it was getting even more so, but it's a triumph for social democracy. I think the Scots have shown everybody else, not just down south, the world, they've shown that we can really do it. And it's the politics of the people, finally, instead of the politics of those hobnobs at the Three Amigos from Westminster.
What do you make of those Three Amigos, the offer that they made, the offer of the unionists? And because Alex Salmond talking earlier, saying he wants this to be put in place quickly.
Well, I thought it was an episode of The Thick of It, watching the Three Amigos, you know, come up there. I just thought, is Armando Iannucci, has he written the script for these guys, you know, because it was just ridiculous. I mean, they were just a joke, the three of them. And this is what this election has done, I mean, this referendum has done, there's no election. It has actually shaken the political establishment at the very roots. I mean, to see David Cameron come up, make a speech in Aberdeen and neglect one thing. He made the speech, but he never talked to a voter. He never actually went down in the streets and said, hello, I'm David Cameron, you know. Ed Miliband, looking with a complete horror as he was in Glasgow, had some lady who was talking to him and going, oh, how do I speak to this person? I mean, it's unbelievable. Patronising, condescending, ridiculous.
Well, now the no vote has come through and Scotland has voted for a united kingdom. Can it be united? Because so many were concerned that this vote would be so divisive.
I think the thing about the Scots is they will stick to their bargain. They will stick to the deal. It's up to the other people to stick to their deal, and that's going to be the difficult bit. I mean, Cameron's got to get his backbenchers in tow, and I think that's going to be rather... This thing could go on for a long time, and they're asking for the white paper by a certain date. I doubt if they're going to get it. Hear me doots about that, I tell you.
OK, Brian, it's been good to get your thoughts. Thanks very much for joining us here this morning.
Keep up the golf.
Thanks very much, Brian. That's the view from Edinburgh. Hugh, back to you.
Naga, thank you very much. Yes, OK, well, we've got some more reaction coming in. George Galloway, who played a pretty prominent part in this campaign, for the Better Together campaign, he's been speaking on BBC Radio, and he said it was a very tough fight. We were reminded all over again, he said, just how hated the Westminster political class is. Is that a fair verdict, Danny?
Well, I spent some time campaigning with George Galloway, and it's been some strange bedfellows in this campaign. We did rallies together in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and he's been a very powerful spokesperson in this campaign. I think we have had a lot of that resentment about politics that we see actually across the whole of Europe and indeed across the wider world at the moment. That's been a feature of this referendum, and it sends a clear message to all of us in politics that we have to deliver the change that we've promised and that people have asked us for, and we have to, I think, change the way that politics works too, in terms of, you know, we often have, you know, great rows between us about things that might seem quite small. This has reminded us that there are some really big issues in politics, and that's what motivates people and gets people engaged. And I think we have to learn that lesson from this campaign.
the strange bedfellows, there's another way of looking at that, which is that there were some strong performers from different branches of the political landscape, really, weren't there? And was that one of the issues that you think was really something that you were presented with in the last few weeks, especially, Alex, which was maybe a telling factor?
Well, not really, because we had very strong performers on our side. I mean, if you look at the role that Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon played, it was absolutely excellent, and I think matched anything and more that the Better Together people were able to boot up. I do think that Gordon Brown's intervention, and I have to say some of what he was saying was just nonsense, but nevertheless, people believed it, and I think Gordon Brown's intervention in the last week undoubtedly put some questions into the minds of people who had decided to vote yes, or had been persuaded, or may have been persuaded, but then decided, I think, at the end of the day to vote no. There will be an analysis, no doubt, by John Curtis and by Nick and others about, you know, at the end of the day, what really decided the outcome. But I do think the fear factor was a big factor, which is this kind of flip side of confidence. And one of the problems Scottish people have had, because we've been told for the last 300 years that we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that, and there's been a big fear factor and a big confidence issue, and I think that definitely played a part in the outcome yesterday.
Well, I mean, if there was a very big fear factor, if that's the case, Alex, it's remarkable that, you know, more than 1.5 million people actually turned out to say we want independence.
Absolutely, and maybe if the campaign had gone on another couple of months, maybe we would have managed to get the majority. But, you know, ifs and ands, pots and pans, at the end of the day, the result is the result, and the result is 55% no and 45% yes.
OK, let's try and build towards our concluding thoughts here. Sarah, at this point, what are the questions that now are presented to us, given, you know, we've talked about the verdict, we've talked about the fact it was a 10% margin, but there are now some big questions. What for you are the top of the list?
There certainly are. It's a clear and decisive result, which means we've avoided the political earthquake of Scotland separating off as an independent country, but there are seismic shocks being sent all the way down to Westminster, and as you say, there are some very big questions. Firstly, in Scotland, Scotland was promised there would be more substantial powers for the Scottish Parliament if Scotland voted no. Alex Salmond, when he came out to admit defeat and to accept the result, said he expects those promises to be honoured in rapid course. The Prime Minister came out from Number 10 and he set out a timetable for this. He told us that he set up a commission. It's going to be chaired by Lord Smith. We're going to talk about what those powers might be. A clear timetable that leads us to March 2015, we know exactly what powers the Scottish Parliament is going to have. But at exactly the same time, he said millions of voices of English voters must now be heard, and that they want a solution that means that the Constitution of the United Kingdom is not too unbalanced if Scotland gets more powers. And he seemed to commit to delivering that in the same timetable. That's going to be extremely difficult to do. There are huge questions over the constitutional settlement of the whole of the United Kingdom, many of which have to be answered in England, a place that's not been having a constitutional debate for quite as long as Scotland has.
No, but it's about to start, Nick.
It certainly is. Remember that when the Constitution has been discussed in British politics, not in Scotland, but in UK politics, it's frankly bored most voters and it's bored most commentators, it's bored most politicians. Remember the referendum on the AV voting system. It was hard to get anybody to vote. Remember Charter 88, excited Guardian readers got people making programmes at the BBC about written constitutions and changes to the voting system. Bored most people. The Liberal Democrats, a whole agenda of constitutional change. They could never get the public ever interested in it. And yet the Constitution may, for the first time in my lifetime, go to the centre of politics. Let's be clear what David Cameron has tried to do this morning. He has tried to put Labour on the spot. What he's tried to do is say, I am the man standing up, and my Tory party is standing up. He is saying, for the Englishman. He's basically saying, I'm going to solve the English question. They are not. There is a battle, in truth, between the Conservative Party and UKIP to be seen to be doing that. That politics will play out all the way through to the next general election. Now, no doubt Scots will worry that they'll get left behind as that's happening. He has promised, the Prime Minister, he'll do both of these things at the same time. But at times, whether it's over budgetary matters, whether it's over the voting rights of Scottish MPs, these agendas aren't separate. They clash. There are problems. Sprinkle in Wales and Northern Ireland, and you've got a really explosive mix.
So
We've seen it here in the studio. We saw David Cameron coming out in Downing Street. We heard William Hague in Westminster laying out how they saw this. English votes for English MPs for English laws. We've had Liberal Democrat and Labour MPs sat here with us. We've asked them all, how on earth are you going to come to agreement on this? What consensus is there over the English question? And they haven't been able to answer it for us.
Just That is true, and I'm just wondering at what point we get an answer which is at least credible and authentic, do you think, from the government, Danny?
Well, look, there's got to be a debate about this English question. I think my word of caution would be, just like constitutional change in Scotland has proceeded by consensus, so must constitutional change in the House of Commons. That's the only way that it can endure and last. As I said earlier, there are some proposals on the table which, whilst protecting the rights of Scottish MPs, also would enhance the ability of English MPs to have a say. I think that is a good starting point. But Sarah's absolutely right. This debate has not been raging in England, but it is an important thing as part of moving towards a more federal system in the United Kingdom, that we do find ways to address this. I have to say, my priority, and I take this responsibility very personally, is to make sure that we deliver in full with a radical programme of further devolution for Scotland. That's the promise we've made in this referendum campaign, and we have to keep that promise. Alex was right in what he said. We have a responsibility to deliver that, to make sure that Scotland is, has a full place in the United Kingdom for centuries to come. We have to make sure we answer that question properly.
OK, Alex, in a sentence.
Implementing the vow for Scotland cannot be held up for the time it takes to get a consensus in England. I think with trying to deal with the West Lothian question, they're trying to square a circle that nobody's been able to square for 40 years. I doubt if they can do it by Christmas.
We shall see. Alex, thank you very much. Alex and Danny, good to have you with us. Sarah and Nick, great to have you with us all night. Thank you very much. Jeremy, if you're watching, and your team, thank you so much.
Thanks you.
Terrific contribution throughout the night. John Curtis, John, thank you. And to all of your team, John, helping us with all the data, everyone there, we are grateful for all your work too in helping the viewers understand what's going on. It's been a remarkable night. Biggest democratic decision in the history of the United Kingdom. The Scots have rejected independence. They will stay within the United Kingdom. I will leave you with a few memorable scenes of a memorable night. Goodbye.
It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take Scotland's future into Scotland's hands.
Yes, 194,779.
The BBC's forecast now is that Scotland has voted no to independence.
No, 194,638.
Scotland has, by majority, decided not, at this stage, to become an independent country. I accept that verdict of the people.
People who were disengaged from politics have turned out in large numbers.
Just as the people of Scotland will have more power over their affairs, so it follows that the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland must have a bigger say over theirs.